The heat came first. Ryder Callow felt it before he saw anything. A wrong kind of warmth pushing through the afternoon air, the kind that didn't belong to July sunshine or summer wind. He pulled Comet to a stop at the ridgeline and squinted down into the valley, one hand resting on the pommel of his saddle while the other shielded his eyes from the glare. Smoke. Not chimney smoke, not campfire smoke. The thick, ugly kind that rises when something that matters is being destroyed. Comet shifted beneath him, ears twitching forward. The horse smelled it too, something burnt and bitter that didn't sit right in the lungs. Ryder leaned forward slightly, scanning the golden expanse below where wheat fields stretched out in neat rectangles, separated by fence lines and irrigation ditches. Most of them looked fine, healthy, ready for harvest in another few weeks. But one field was dying. 6 men moved through the wheat in a loose line, torches in hand, working with the steady rhythm of people who'd done this before. They weren't frantic, weren't looking over their shoulders. They moved like ranch hands clearing brush or loggers felling timber, methodical, efficient, unbothered. Behind them, the wheat burned in a slow, crawling wave. Ryder's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of fires in his 34 years. Prairie fires that moved like living things, devouring everything in their path. Barn fires started by careless lanterns. Entire towns reduced to ash by accident or arson. But this wasn't any of those things. This was deliberate, controlled, casual. "Come on," he muttered, nudging Comet forward. The descent into the valley was steep, the trail winding between scrub oak and limestone outcrops that radiated stored heat like oven stones. Grasshoppers exploded from the dry grass with every step, their wings snapping like distant applause. By the time Ryder reached level ground, the smoke had thickened enough to taste. Wheat chaff and oil and something chemical he couldn't name. The farmhouse sat at the eastern edge of the field, a squat structure with a sagging porch and a roof that had been patched more times than replaced. 2 figures stood in the yard, both motionless, both watching the fire spread. The older man was maybe 65, 70, tall once, but time and work had bent him into a forward lean, like a tree shaped by prevailing wind. He wore canvas trousers held up by suspenders and a shirt that had been white about a decade ago. His hands hung at his sides, empty. The boy beside him couldn't have been more than 16. Lean and sunburnt, with the kind of frame that hadn't finished filling out yet. He had his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale. Neither of them looked at Ryder when he approached. Their eyes stayed locked on the burning field. "Afternoon," Ryder said, reining Comet in a few feet away. The old man didn't respond right away, just kept staring at the fire, his face blank in the way people get when they've already processed the worst of it and come out the other side too tired to feel much of anything. The boy turned, though. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from smoke or tears or rage, Ryder couldn't tell. "You a lawman?" the boy asked. "No." "Then you can't do anything." "Jonah," the old man said quietly. "Don't." "Why not?" Jonah's voice cracked on the question. "He's just another person who's going to watch and do nothing, like everyone else." Ryder dismounted, keeping his movements slow. He pulled his canteen from his saddle and took a drink, then offered it to the boy. Jonah stared at it like it might be poisoned, but after a moment he took it and drank deep, his throat working in hard swallows. "I'm Harold Mercer," the old man said finally. "That's my grandson, Jonah. This is my land, or it was. Was." Harold's expression didn't change. "According to them, it isn't anymore." Ryder glanced toward the burning field. The 6 men had made it about halfway across, their torches still working in steady arcs. One of them glanced toward the farmhouse, saw Ryder, and said something to the others. They didn't stop working. "Who are they?" "Calvin Ward's men," Harold said. "He owns most of the valley now, wants the rest of it." "And the law's fine with this?" "The law," Jonah spat, handing the canteen back, "doesn't give a damn." Harold put a hand on his grandson's shoulder, a gesture that looked automatic, worn smooth by repetition. "Sheriff Holbrook says it's a property dispute, says we should settle it in court." "You do that?" "Tried. Lawyer looked at the papers Ward's people filed and said they were legal. Said Ward bought the mortgage from the bank and we defaulted, so the land's his now." Harold's voice stayed flat, reciting facts like they were weather reports. "I told him we never missed a payment. Not once in 42 years. He said the bank's records showed different. Ryder felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard versions of this story before, in other towns, other territories. The details changed, but the shape of it stayed the same. People with power rewriting the rules until the rules said whatever they needed them to say. How many farms? He asked. Ours is the 7th, Jonah said. Started last year. One every couple months. Always the same. Ward buys the debt, says they defaulted, burns them out when they won't leave. And nobody fights back. The Corrigan family tried, Harold said quietly. Their house burned down 3 nights later. They lost everything. The sheriff called it an accident, lamp oil, he said. Never mind that John Corrigan didn't keep lamps in his barn, or that his wife smelled kerosene 2 hours before the fire started. Ryder watched the smoke rise, black and oily against the blue sky. Where is everyone now? The Corrigans? The others? Gone. Most of them left the valley entirely. A few sold out to Ward for whatever he'd pay, which wasn't much. The Corrigans went south, I think. Or maybe east. Nobody's heard from them. One of the men in the field, a broad-shouldered figure with a red bandana tied around his neck, started walking toward the farmhouse. The others kept working, but their postures changed slightly, shoulders squaring, hands adjusting their grip on their torches. Here we go, Jonah muttered. The man stopped about 20 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, but far enough to keep space. He had the look of someone who'd done physical work his whole life, muscles built from labor rather than vanity, and a face that hadn't seen a smile in a long time. Mr. Mercer, the man said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a bucket. You need to clear out now. This land's been claimed under lawful seizure, and you're trespassing. This is my home, Harold said. Not according to the county clerk. You got 24 hours to remove your personal effects. After that, anything left behind becomes property of the Ward Cattle Company. You're burning my wheat, Harold said. And for the first time, Ryder heard something crack in the old man's voice. Not anger, but something worse. Grief. The sound of a man watching his life's work turn to ash and knowing there was nothing he could do about it. The man with the bandana looked uncomfortable for half a second, then his face hardened again. That's to prevent squatters from harvesting what doesn't belong to them. Ward's orders. It belonged to me yesterday. Yesterday doesn't matter. Jonah stepped forward, fists still clenched. You know this is wrong. You know it. The man's eyes flicked to the boy, then away. I know I got a job to do. You want to dispute the claim, take it to court. But right now, you need to leave. And if we don't? Jonah's voice was shaking. The man didn't answer. He just looked at the boy for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the others. Ryder waited until he was out of earshot. You have somewhere to go? Harold nodded slowly. My daughter lives in Silver Ridge, 2 days north. She's been asking us to come stay with her for years. Then you should go. And leave everything? Jonah turned on him, eyes blazing. Just walk away and let them win? You stay. You'll get hurt, Ryder said flatly. Or killed, and it won't change anything. So we just run. You survive. There's a difference. Jonah looked like he wanted to argue, but Harold's hand tightened on his shoulder. He's right, boy. We can't fight this. Not like this. Then how? Jonah's voice broke completely this time. How do we fight it? Nobody answered. The fire kept burning. A sec. Ryder left them there. Harold staring at his ruined field, Jonah shaking with impotent rage, and rode toward town. Comet picked his way along the dirt road that connected the scattered farms to Harrow's Crossing proper, passing empty fields and houses that looked too quiet, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. The town itself sat in a shallow bowl between 2 low hills, arranged around a main street that ran north to south. It wasn't much, maybe 300 people when everyone was home, the kind of place that existed because the land around it was good for farming and the railroad was close enough to matter. False front buildings lined the street, a mercantile, a bank, a hotel with peeling paint and a sign that read, Rooms by the Week, a church at the north end, its steeple crooked, a saloon at the south end, its door propped open to catch whatever breeze decided to come through. Ryder tied Comet outside the saloon and went in. The interior was dim and smelled like old beer and sawdust. A handful of men sat scattered across the room, day laborers mostly, nursing drinks and avoiding eye contact. The bartender was a heavy-set man with a beard that had gone gray in patches, wiping down the bar with a rag that looked like it had given up on being cleaned sometime around the turn of the century. "Whiskey," Ryder said, settling onto a stool. The bartender poured without comment, sliding the glass across the scarred wood. Ryder drank, let the burn settle, then spoke. "Saw something interesting on the way in. Men burning a wheat field in broad daylight." The bartender's hand paused mid-wipe, just for a second. "That's so. Seems strange. I thought burning crops was the kind of thing people did during wartime, not in peacetime." "Depends on who you ask." "I'm asking you." The bartender looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the trail dust on Ryder's clothes, the worn grips of the revolvers at his hips, the way he sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. "You're not from here." "Just passing through." "Then my advice is to keep passing. Whatever you saw, it's not your business." "Funny thing about fire," Ryder said. "It doesn't care whose business it is. It spreads." One of the men at a corner table stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He was young, maybe 25, with the look of someone who worked with his hands but hadn't done enough of it to build real strength yet. He walked over, stopping a few feet from Ryder's stool. "You got a problem, mister?" Ryder took another sip of whiskey. "Not yet. You're talking about things you don't understand. So explain them." The young man's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. "Finally, Calvin Ward owns this valley. He bought it, legal and proper. If people don't like his methods, they can take it to court. Harold Mercer did that, didn't seem to help. Mercer's a fool. He should have sold when he had the chance. And if he didn't want to sell?" The young man's face darkened. "Then he should have thought about that before he defaulted on his mortgage." "Funny," Ryder said. "He told me he never missed a payment." "Then he's a liar." The bartender set his rag down carefully. "Tommy, maybe I should what?" Tommy turned on him. "Let some stranger come in here and talk about things he doesn't understand? Act like Mr. Ward's the villain when he's the only one bringing real money into this valley." "By burning people out?" "By investing in the future," Tommy's voice rose. "The railroad's coming through here in 2 years, maybe less. Ward knows it. He's been buying up land so when it happens, this whole valley will prosper. But people like Mercer, they can't see past their own fences. They don't understand progress." "Progress?" Ryder repeated. "That's what you call it." "What would you call it?" "Theft." Tommy's hand moved toward his belt, not to a gun, but to a knife sheathed at his side. The movement was instinctive, angry, not thought through. Ryder didn't stand, didn't reach for his own weapons, just watched the young man with the kind of stillness that made people nervous. The bartender moved fast for a heavy man, stepping between them with both hands raised. "That's enough. Tommy, sit down. You drink your whiskey and move on." Tommy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the bartender's expression made him back off. He returned to his table, muttering under his breath. Ryder finished his drink, set a coin on the bar, and stood. "Where's the sheriff's office?" 2 blocks north, but he won't help you." Didn't ask if he would. Asked where he was. The bartender studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You got a death wish, mister?" "Not today." Outside, the sun had started its slow descent toward the western hills, stretching shadows across the street. Ryder found the sheriff's office easily enough. A small building with barred windows and a sign that hung slightly crooked. He pushed the door open without knocking. The interior was sparse. A desk covered in paperwork, a cabinet with a padlock, 2 cells in the back that were currently empty. A man sat behind the desk, middle-aged and soft around the middle, with a mustache that had gone more gray than brown and eyes that looked perpetually tired. Sheriff Vance Holbrook glanced up from whatever he was reading. "Help you?" "Got a question." "I might have an answer." Ryder stepped fully inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. "Why aren't you arresting the men burning Harold Mercer's field?" Holbrook's expression didn't change. He set down his paper, a legal document of some kind, dense with text, and folded his hands on the desk. "Because they're not breaking any laws." "Arson's not a law?" "It's not arson if it's your own property. It's Mercer's property, not according to this county clerk's office. Calvin Ward holds the deed now. Has for 3 weeks. Mercer was notified. He refused to vacate. So Ward's people are clearing the land for redevelopment, which is their legal right. Ryder felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. Mercer says he never defaulted. Mercer's memory doesn't match the bank's records. You checked those records yourself? Holbrook's eyes narrowed slightly. You accusing me of not doing my job? I'm asking if you did it. I reviewed the documentation provided by Ward's legal representatives. Everything was in order. Notarized, filed properly, timestamps all correct. If Mercer wants to dispute it, he can hire a lawyer and take it to a judge. He already tried that. Then he got his answer. Ryder stepped closer to the desk, his voice dropping. 6 other families. Same thing happened to all of them. You really think that's coincidence? For the first time, something flickered across Holbrook's face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Discomfort, maybe. The look of a man who knows he's walking a line he shouldn't have to walk. What I think, Holbrook said slowly, doesn't matter. I enforce the law as it's written. If Ward's doing something illegal, prove it. Bring me evidence. Until then, I got nothing to arrest him for. So you'll just let him take the whole valley. I'll do my job, which is keeping the peace and upholding legal claims. Holbrook leaned back in his chair. You're not from here, so let me explain something. Calvin Ward employs 30 men full-time, more during cattle season. He buys supplies from local businesses, pays taxes that keep this town running, and has more lawyers than I got deputies. If he's breaking the law, it's not obvious, and it's not something I can prove. So unless you're here to file a formal complaint with actual evidence, this conversation's over. Ryder stared at him for a long moment. You know what's happening. I know what I can prove. That's not the same thing. Holbrook's jaw tightened. No, it's not. But it's all I got. Now get out of my office. Ryder left the sheriff's office with the taste of copper in his mouth and a familiar weight settling in his chest, the heavy, tired feeling that came from recognizing a pattern he'd seen too many times before. Different towns, different names, same story. Power protecting power while everyone else pretended not to see. He walked Comet toward the hotel, intending to get a room and sleep on whether this was his problem or not. But halfway there, he noticed a woman standing outside the county clerk's office, arms crossed, staring at something through the window. She was maybe 30, 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a dress that was clean but worn at the cuffs. She had the posture of someone who'd spent years behind a desk, but hadn't let it make her soft. Straight spine, squared shoulders, the kind of bearing that suggested she didn't apologize often. Ryder almost kept walking. Almost. But something about the expression on her face, concentration mixed with frustration, made him stop. Problem? He asked. She glanced at him, startled, then looked back at the window. Depends on your definition. Try me. I'm trying to remember a number. Should be simple. I work with these records every day, but I keep coming up one short, and it's driving me insane. What kind of number? Farm parcels. She finally looked at him properly, taking in his appearance with the quick, assessing gaze of someone used to evaluating strangers. You're not local. Riding through. A lot of that lately. She held out a hand. Lena Hart, county land clerk. Ryder Callow. Her handshake was firm, businesslike. What brings you to Harrow's Crossing, Mr. Callow? Saw something that didn't sit right. The burning. It wasn't a question. Ryder nodded. Lena looked back at the window, her expression darkening. That makes 8. No, 7. Harold Mercer's is 7. You keep count? It's my job to keep count. Every parcel of land in this county goes through my office. Deeds, mortgages, transfers, liens, all of it crosses my desk. And for the past 14 months, I've been watching the same thing happen over and over. Which is? Farmers who've held their land for decades suddenly default on mortgages they've been paying faithfully for years. Calvin Ward buys the debt from the bank, always within days of the default notice. The farmers dispute it, but the bank's records say they're behind, so the claim goes through. Ward takes possession, clears the land, and adds it to his holdings. And nobody questions it. Lena's laugh was bitter. Oh, people question it, but Ward's lawyers bury them in paperwork. Appeals get delayed. Judges defer to the bank's documentation. By the time anyone could mount a real legal challenge, the family's already been forced out and the land's been sold or absorbed. It's efficient, systematic. And you can't stop it. I'm a clerk, Mr. Callow. I record transactions. I don't have the authority to block them, even when they smell wrong. And these... She gestured toward the window, toward whatever records were visible inside. These smell like a slaughterhouse in August. Ryder studied her. But you've been looking anyway. Wouldn't you? He thought about that. Yeah, I would. Then you understand why I'm standing here trying to remember a number that should be obvious. Lena rubbed her temples. There's a pattern. I can feel it, but I can't see all the pieces yet. The bank records don't match my files, but they're always just close enough that I can't call them outright forgeries. Dates are shifted by a day or two. Amounts are rounded differently. Little discrepancies that could be clerical errors, except there are too many of them, and they all favor Ward. You tell anyone? I told Sheriff Holbrook. He said unless I had proof of fraud, it wasn't his problem. I told Mayor Pierce. He said I should be careful about making accusations against prominent citizens without evidence. I even tried writing to the territorial governor's office. Got a letter back 6 weeks later saying they'd look into it, which means they filed it somewhere and forgot about it. Ryder pulled out his tobacco pouch, rolling a cigarette with practiced movements. So what are you going to do? Lena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then, I'm going to keep counting, because eventually, Ward's going to make a mistake. Something will be too obvious to ignore. A date that's impossible, a signature that doesn't match, a payment that can't be accounted for. And when that happens, I'm going to have every single one of these transactions documented and ready. That could take months, years even. Then it takes years. She looked at him directly, her eyes hard. These are people's lives, Mr. Callow, their homes, their futures. If nobody else is going to fight for them, then I will, even if I'm the only one. Ryder lit his cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the gathering dusk. You're not the only one. Lena's expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been hope, quickly tamped down. You planning to stay? Haven't decided yet. Well, when you do, you know where to find me. She turned to go, then paused. Be careful, Mr. Callow. Ward doesn't like people who ask questions, and he's not above making examples. Thanks for the warning. She left, walking with quick, determined steps back toward her office. Ryder watched her go, then finished his cigarette and crushed it under his boot heel. The sun had dropped behind the western hills now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked uncomfortably like fire. Lights were starting to appear in windows up and down the street, families settling in for the evening, pretending everything was normal, pretending they didn't smell smoke on the wind. Ryder led Comet to the livery stable, paid for a stall and feed, and walked to the hotel. The lobby was small and shabby, staffed by an old man who barely looked up from his newspaper when Ryder asked for a room. $3 a week, 50 cents a night, the clerk said. One night. Suit yourself. The room was on the second floor, overlooking the main street. It had a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a window that didn't quite close all the way. Ryder set his saddlebags on the floor, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, and washed the trail dust from his face and hands. Then he sat on the bed and thought about Harold Mercer, standing in his yard, watching 42 years of work burn. He thought about Jonah's clenched fists and cracking voice. He thought about Lena Hart, standing outside her office, counting crimes nobody else wanted to acknowledge. And he thought about the pattern, because it was always a pattern. Men like Calvin Ward didn't operate on impulse. They planned, they built systems, they created structures that looked legal enough to pass inspection, but were rotten underneath, designed to extract and exploit and leave nothing behind but ash and empty land. Ryder had seen it before. Mining towns stripped to nothing, timber operations that clear-cut entire forests and moved on, railroad companies that took what they needed and left communities to starve when the tracks moved elsewhere. The details changed, the shape stayed the same, and every time the same question, was it his problem? He could leave tomorrow, ride north or south or east, find another town, another job, another horizon. Harold and Jonah would go to Silver Ridge. Lena would keep counting. The valley would burn or not burn without him. It would be easy. It would be smart. It would be the thing he'd done a dozen times before, because getting involved meant getting hurt, and he'd been hurt enough for one lifetime. But then he thought about the way Harold's voice had cracked, that awful, hollow sound of grief too big to fight, and he knew he wasn't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Ryder lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and waited for morning. Outside, the valley slept. And somewhere in the darkness, the fire kept burning. Morning came with the smell of burnt wheat still hanging in the air. Ryder woke before dawn, muscles stiff from the thin mattress, and a night spent half listening for trouble that never came. He dressed in the dark, strapped on his gun belt, and was on the street before the first shopkeepers started opening their shutters. Harrow's Crossing looked different in the early light. Smaller, more fragile, like a place holding its breath. The buildings seemed to lean toward each other for support, their false fronts casting long shadows across the empty dirt road. A dog wandered past, ribby and unconcerned. Somewhere a rooster crowed, late or confused. Ryder walked to the livery stable, paid the stable hand who was mucking out stalls, and saddled Comet himself. The horse nickered softly, nosing at his pockets for sugar he didn't have. "Not today," Ryder muttered, tightening the cinch. "We're working." He rode out of town heading west, following the road that connected the scattered farms. The valley spread out before him in the pale morning light, fields in various states of harvest readiness, irrigation ditches glinting like silver threads, fence posts marching in uneven lines across the landscape. Beautiful in its way. The kind of place people built lives around. The kind of place worth stealing. The first farm he passed looked abandoned. The house was dark, shutters closed, weeds growing tall in what had been a kitchen garden. A hand-painted sign nailed to the fence post read, "Property of Ward Cattle Company. No trespassing." The paint was fresh. The second farm was occupied, barely. An old woman sat on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl, her hands moving with automatic precision while her eyes tracked Ryder's passage. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him at all, just watched until he was out of sight. The third farm was the Mercer place. Harold and Jonah were loading a wagon in the yard, their movements heavy with exhaustion and defeat. The field behind them was a black scar on the landscape, still smoking in places where roots continued to smolder underground. The smell of it was worse up close, acrid and wrong, like something that should have been buried instead of burned. Ryder dismounted, tying Comet to a fence post. Harold looked up from the crate he was lifting, recognition flickering across his weathered face. "Thought you'd be gone by now," the old man said. "Thought so too." "Then you're a fool." Harold set the crate in the wagon with more force than necessary. "Or you've got a taste for losing fights." "Maybe both." Jonah emerged from the house carrying a bundle of clothes tied with rope. His eyes were still red, but the tears had been replaced by something harder, a kind of brittle anger that made him move too fast, grip things too tight. He threw the bundle into the wagon and turned to Ryder. "You here to help or watch?" "Depends. Where are you going?" "North," Harold said. "Like I told you, my daughter's place." "And after that?" The old man's face closed off. "After that doesn't matter. We're done here." Ryder pulled out his tobacco pouch, taking his time rolling a cigarette. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of the wagon and the distant call of a hawk circling over the ruined field. "What if it wasn't legal?" Ryder said finally. Harold's hand stilled. "What?" "The foreclosure, the deed transfer. What if it wasn't actually legal?" "The bank says it was. Ward's lawyers say it was. The sheriff says it was. Who's going to argue different?" "The land clerk." That got both their attentions. Jonah stepped closer, his expression sharpening. "Lena Hart? She told you about this?" Harold's voice carried a thread of something that might have been hope if it hadn't been beaten down so many times already. "She said the numbers don't add up, said there are discrepancies in the records, small ones, but too many to be accidents." Ryder lit his cigarette. "Said she's been documenting everything." "Documenting," Harold repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. "That'll get her about as far as it got us. Ward's got judges in his pocket. He's got the bank president playing cards at his ranch every Sunday. He's got—" "Money," Jonah interrupted. "That's what he's got, money and meanness and no reason to stop." "Unless someone finds proof," Ryder said. Harold barked a laugh, short and humorless. "Proof? You think we didn't look? You think we didn't try? Ward's people cover their tracks. Everything's signed, everything's notarized, everything's filed in triplicate. It looks legal because they made it look legal. But it's not.
Doesn't matter what it is, matters what you can prove. Harold picked up another crate, his movements mechanical. We're leaving, Mr. Callow. We're leaving before they decide burning the field wasn't enough and come for the house, too. I lost the land. I'm not losing my grandson. Ryder looked at Jonah, who was staring at his grandfather with an expression caught between loyalty and frustration. The boy wanted to fight, wanted to believe there was still a chance, but he was also 16 years old and smart enough to know that wanting something didn't make it possible. Before you go, Ryder said, I need names. Every farmer Ward's done this to. Every person who might remember something that doesn't fit. Every detail that seemed wrong at the time but got buried under paperwork. Harold shook his head. What's the point? The point is maybe Lena's right. Maybe there's a pattern. Maybe if I look at all of it together, something jumps out. And then what? You going to take on Calvin Ward by yourself? If I have to. The words hung in the air between them, absurd and serious at the same time. Harold studied Ryder's face, looking for the joke or the angle or whatever made a man say something that stupid with a straight face. You really mean that, Harold said finally. I really do. Then you're crazier than I thought. But something in Harold's posture shifted slightly, the rigid defeat loosening just a fraction. Jonah, get my ledger, the one from the desk. The boy ran into the house, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. Harold sat down heavily on the edge of the wagon, suddenly looking every one of his years. The first one was the Henderson place, he said quietly. About 14 months ago. They'd been here longer than us. Tom Henderson's father homesteaded that land back in '51. Tom never missed a payment on anything in his life. Then one day the bank says he's 3 months behind, and a week later Calvin Ward owns the property. Tom tried to fight it, got nowhere, and moved his family to Colorado. Haven't heard from them since. Jonah returned with the leather-bound book, its pages thick with years of entries. He handed it to his grandfather, who opened it to a page marked with a strip of cloth. I started keeping notes after the Hendersons, Harold said. Didn't know why at the time, just felt wrong, so I wrote it down. He ran his finger down the page. After them came the Pritchard family. Same story. Sudden default, Ward buys the debt, family gets forced out. They went south, I think. Then the Yates farm, the Morrison property, the Kellerman homestead. His voice trailed off. The Corrigans were 6th. That was the fire. After that, people stopped fighting. Just took whatever Ward offered and left. Ryder memorized the names, committing them to the same mental filing system he'd built over years of tracking bounties and following trails. Henderson, Pritchard, Yates, Morrison, Kellerman, Corrigan, Mercer. 7 families, 14 months. Roughly 1 every 2 months. Any of them still in the area? The Yateses moved into town, got a room above the feed store. Can't afford to go anywhere else yet. Harold closed the ledger. Alice Morrison works at the hotel now. Her husband drinks what they would have used for travel money, so they're stuck. The others, gone. What about people who work for Ward? Anyone who might talk? Harold's expression darkened. You met his crew yesterday. They're loyal. Or scared. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. There's always someone. Maybe. Harold didn't sound convinced. There's a man named Mason Drake. He supervises Ward's field operations, burning, clearing, fence work, all of it. He's been with Ward for years, knows everything that happens on the properties. If anyone could prove Ward's breaking the law, it'd be Drake. Will he talk? Not a chance. Drake's a hard man. Drinks alone, keeps to himself, does what he's told. Word is Ward pays him well enough that he doesn't ask questions. Ryder filed that away too. Mason Drake, supervisor, hard, quiet, well paid, the kind of man who'd know where the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig the holes. Where does he drink? Saloon on the south end of town, same one you went to yesterday, probably. Harold hesitated. Don't expect him to help you. Whatever conscience he might have had, he killed it a long time ago. We'll see. Jonah was watching Ryder with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You really think you can stop this? I think if I don't try, nothing changes. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. The boy nodded slowly, chewing on that. Then, I want to help. No, Harold said immediately.
Grandpa,
I said no. We're leaving. Today. This morning. We're going to pack this wagon, and we're going to ride north, and we're going to start over, and you're not going to throw your life away chasing revenge. It's not revenge, Jonah said, his voice rising. It's justice. There's a difference. Not when you're dead, there isn't. So we just run? Let them win? We survive, like Mr. Callow said yesterday. There's a difference. Jonah's hands clenched into fists again, that same helpless rage from yesterday flooding back. But this time he didn't argue, just stood there shaking with it, eyes bright with tears he refused to shed. Ryder knew that feeling, had lived with it himself years ago when he'd been young enough to think anger could change the world and old enough to realize how rarely it did. Your grandfather's right, Ryder said quietly. Well, this isn't your fight. Then whose fight is it? Jonah turned on him. You? You don't even live here. Why do you care? It was a fair question. Ryder took a long drag on his cigarette, buying time to find an answer that wasn't a lie. I've been in towns like this before, he said finally, seen what happens when powerful men decide they want something and nobody stops them. It doesn't end with 1 farm or 7 farms. It ends when there's nothing left to take, and by then everyone who could have fought back is either gone or broken. He met Jonah's eyes. Maybe I can't stop it. Maybe I'll try and fail and ride out of here with nothing but bruises to show for it, but at least I'll know I tried. Then let me try too. You're 16. So? So you've got time to build a life that isn't about fighting. Don't waste it. Jonah looked like he wanted to argue more, but Harold's hand landed on his shoulder again, that same worn gesture, equal parts comfort and restraint. Help me finish loading the wagon, Harold said. Please. The boy's shoulders slumped. Fine. They worked in silence for the next half hour, carrying out the pieces of a life that would fit in a wagon and leaving behind everything that wouldn't. Ryder helped without being asked, lifting crates and tying down loads, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. When the wagon was full and the house was empty, Harold stood in the yard one last time, looking at the ruined field and the home he'd built with his own hands 42 years ago. His face was blank again, that terrible emptiness of someone who'd used up all their grief and anger and had nothing left but resignation. If you do find something, Harold said, not looking at Ryder, you bring it to the territorial governor, not the local law. Holbrook won't help. Neither will Mayor Pierce or Judge Watson or anyone else in this county. They're all tied to Ward somehow, money or favors or fear. You need someone outside the system. Noted. And be careful. Ward doesn't just ruin people legally. There are other ways. I know. Harold finally turned to look at him. Why are you really doing this? Ryder thought about that. About all the towns he'd ridden away from, all the fights he'd avoided, all the times he told himself it wasn't his problem. About the weight that accumulated when you spent your life stepping over other people's injustices because getting involved meant bleeding, and he'd already bled enough. Because I'm tired of leaving, he said. Harold held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Good luck, Mr. Callow. You too. They shook hands, Harold's grip weathered and strong despite everything, and then the old man climbed onto the wagon. Jonah sat beside him, looking back at Ryder with an expression that promised this wasn't over, not for him, no matter what his grandfather said. The wagon pulled away, wheels creaking, heading north toward Silver Ridge, and whatever came after. Ryder watched until they disappeared around a bend in the road, then mounted Comet and rode in the opposite direction. The county clerk's office wasn't open yet when Ryder arrived, so he waited on the steps, smoking and watching the town wake up. Shopkeepers unlocking doors, women carrying baskets toward the mercantile, men heading to work at the mill or the stockyards or wherever their labor was needed today. Normal life, continuing like nothing was wrong, because for most of them, nothing was wrong yet. Lena Hart arrived 20 minutes later, walking fast with a leather satchel slung over her shoulder and keys already in her hand. She saw Ryder and stopped. Mr. Callow. Miss Hart. You stayed. Apparently, she studied him for a moment, her expression guarded. Then she unlocked the door and pushed it open. Come in. But if anyone asks, you're here about property records for a piece of land you're thinking of buying. Am I? You are now. The interior of the clerk's office was cramped and crowded with filing cabinets, ledgers stacked on every available surface, Maps pinned to the walls showing the valley divided into parcels. A desk sat beneath the single window, its surface covered in neat piles of papers weighted down with river stones. Everything was organized with the kind of obsessive precision that suggested Lena didn't trust anyone else to maintain the system. She set her satchel down and immediately started pulling files, her movements quick and efficient. What do you want to know? Everything. That's not helpful. Fine. Start with the Henderson place. First foreclosure 14 months ago. What do your records show? Lena pulled a file from a cabinet near the back, flipping it open on her desk. Thomas Henderson, property parcel 47B, 240 acres, house, barn, well. Mortgage originated in 1868 with Harrow's Crossing Bank and Trust. Payments current until, she ran her finger down the page, March of last year, when the bank filed a default notice claiming 3 missed payments. What does your copy say? My copy matches the bank's version, but I keep a secondary log, personal notes for things that seem off. And I wrote here, she tapped a margin note, that Henderson had come in 2 months earlier asking about irrigation rights, and he'd mentioned putting extra money down on his mortgage to cover next year's taxes early. Does that sound like someone about to default? No, exactly. But the bank's documentation was clean. Signatures, dates, amounts, all correct. Henderson disputed it, but he couldn't prove the payments had been made. Said he'd paid in cash, as always, and the bank had given him receipts, but when he went to look for them, they'd been misplaced. Without the receipts, it was his word against the bank's records. Ryder leaned against the desk. Who processed the foreclosure? Ward's lawyers. They bought the debt from the bank within 48 hours of the default notice, almost like they'd been waiting for it, and immediately filed for seizure of the property. By the time Henderson could mount any kind of legal challenge, the deed had already transferred. And the bank president? Gerald Kincaid. He's owned the bank for 20 years, pillar of the community, church deacon, all of that. Lena's voice carried a bitter edge. Also plays cards with Calvin Ward every Sunday, and borrowed $50,000 from Ward last year to expand the bank building. So he's compromised. He's owned. Ryder pulled out his tobacco, rolling another cigarette while Lena pulled more files. The next one was the Pritchard family, then the Yates farm, then the Morrisons. Each file told the same story with minor variations. Longtime residents with good payment histories suddenly defaulting. Ward's immediate purchase of the debt. Legal challenges that went nowhere. Families forced out. What about the land itself? Ryder asked. What's Ward doing with it once he takes ownership? That's the interesting part. Lena spread out a map of the valley, marking each acquired property with a pencil. Look at the pattern. He's not taking random farms. He's creating a corridor, a continuous strip of land running east to west through the valley, about 3 miles wide. Ryder studied the map. She was right. The acquired properties formed a band that cut through the heart of the valley like a scar. Railroad? That's my guess. There's been talk for years about a spur line connecting the territorial rail system to the mining operations up north. If the railroad comes through here, it'll need right-of-way, and whoever controls the land controls the negotiation. Ward's positioning himself to profit. More than that. If he owns the corridor, he can charge the railroad company for access, charge neighboring farmers for transport, charge the town for depot construction, basically create a monopoly on the only thing that could bring real prosperity to this region. Lena sat down heavily in her chair. It's brilliant, in a terrible way. He's not just stealing land, he's stealing the future. Ryder finished his cigarette and crushed it carefully under his boot. Where's the proof? That's the problem. Everything I've told you is supposition based on patterns and timing. None of it proves fraud. The bank records support Ward's claims. The lawyer's documentation is airtight. Unless someone can prove the foreclosures were manufactured, that the defaults were fictional, or the payments were deliberately misrecorded, there's no case. So we need access to the bank's internal records. The originals, before they were altered. Good luck with that. Kincaid won't let anyone near them without a court order. And getting a court order requires evidence we don't have. It's circular. Ryder paced the small office, thinking. Somewhere in the chain there had to be a weak link. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who might talk if the pressure was right. What about Ward's people? Anyone who's been around long enough to know how this works? Most of his crew are hired guns or drifters. They don't ask questions, they just follow orders. But there's his supervisor, Mason Drake. He's been with Ward for years, handles all the property acquisitions, knows exactly what's happening. Will he talk?
Lena's laugh was sharp. Drake? He's a ghost. Shows up, does the work, collects his pay, disappears. I've tried talking to him twice. First time he walked away without saying a word. Second time he told me if I bothered him again, he'd make sure I regretted it. Friendly. He's a professional, does his job, doesn't get involved, doesn't care what it costs other people. The worst kind.
Ryder filed that away, building a mental picture of Mason Drake. Competent, loyal, dangerous, isolated. The kind of man who'd be hard to turn, but not impossible. Everyone had a pressure point. Everyone had a line they wouldn't cross, even if they'd already crossed a dozen others. I need to talk to the Yateses, Ryder said, and Alice Morrison. Get their versions of what happened. See if there's anything in their stories that doesn't match the official record. The Yateses won't talk. They're terrified. After what happened to the Corrigans, most people are. I'll be careful. Careful doesn't matter when you're dealing with Ward. He doesn't care about rules or witnesses or... The door opened, cutting off whatever Lena was going to say. A man stepped inside, tall, well-dressed in a suit that was too expensive for Harrow's Crossing, with the kind of face that suggested he smiled often but meant it rarely. He had gray at his temples and a gold watch chain across his vest and eyes that took in everything with the cold calculation of someone used to assessing value. "Miss Hart," he said pleasantly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Lena's face went carefully neutral. "Mr. Turner, what can I do for you?" "Just checking on the status of the Mercer property transfer. I understand the family vacated this morning, so I'd like to ensure the deed is recorded properly. I'll process it when I receive the official documentation from your office." Of course. Turner's eyes shifted to Ryder, evaluating. "I don't believe we've met. James Turner, legal counsel for the Ward Cattle Company." Ryder didn't offer his hand. "Ryder Callow." "Mr. Callow. Are you new to the area?" "Passing through." "Ah, well, welcome to Harrow's Crossing. If you're looking for employment, the Ward Company is always seeking reliable men." "I'm not." Turner's smile didn't change, but something cold flickered behind it. "Miss Hart, perhaps you could help Mr. Callow with whatever he needs. I'd hate to take up too much of your time." It wasn't a question. Lena's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Of course." Turner tipped his hat, a gesture that was more mockery than courtesy, and left, the door closing softly behind him. The silence in the office was thick and uncomfortable. Ryder watched through the window as Turner walked across the street toward a large building with a sign that read, Ward Cattle Company, Regional Headquarters. "That was a warning," Lena said quietly. "I noticed. He saw you here. Now Ward knows you exist, knows you're asking questions, knows you're talking to me." Her hands were shaking slightly. "You need to be very careful, Mr. Callow." "And you?" "I work here. I have to stay." She straightened the files on her desk, a nervous gesture. "But you don't. You could leave right now and never look back." "We've had this conversation." "I know. I just want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. Ward has resources. He has lawyers and hired men and judges who owe him favors. If he decides you're a problem, you won't just lose a fight. You'll disappear." Ryder met her eyes. "Then I guess I better be smart about this." Lena held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The Yateses live above the feed store on the east side of town. The Morrisons. Alice works at the hotel where you're staying. She's usually on shift around noon. If you're going to talk to them, do it quietly. Don't be seen." "Understood." "And Mr. Callow?" Lena's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. For staying. For trying. Even if it doesn't work, at least someone tried." Ryder nodded and left, stepping back out into the morning sun that was already heating up toward uncomfortable. The street was busier now, people moving through their routines, none of them aware that Turner had just marked him as a threat. He had maybe a day, maybe two, before Ward decided to do something about it. He needed to move fast. The feed store was exactly where Lena said it would be, a weathered building with a false front and a loading dock out back. Ryder entered through the front, where an older man was weighing out oats for a customer. He waited until the transaction finished, then asked about the Yateses. The man's expression closed off immediately. "They're not here. I saw smoke from the chimney."
They don't want visitors. I'm not selling anything. I just need 5 minutes.
The man looked at him for a long moment, weighing something Ryder couldn't see. Finally, stairs in the back. Knock first. If they don't answer, leave them alone. Ryder climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, where a single door led to what had probably been storage space converted into living quarters. He knocked, the sound hollow in the dim hallway. Nothing. He knocked again. Mr. Yates? My name's Ryder Callow. I'm looking into Calvin Ward's land acquisitions. I'd like to ask you some questions. More silence. Then quietly from the other side of the door. Go away. I'm trying to help. You can't help. Nobody can. Let me try. I said go away. Ryder stood there for a moment, debating whether to push harder. But he could hear fear in that voice, thick and real and earned, and he knew pushing wouldn't work. Fear like that couldn't be argued with. It had to be proven wrong, and right now he didn't have anything to prove it with. If you change your mind, Ryder said, I'm staying at the hotel. Room 12. No response. He left, the stairs creaking under his weight. Alice Morrison was easier to find. She was cleaning rooms on the second floor of the hotel when Ryder returned, pushing a cart loaded with linens and cleaning supplies. She was maybe 40, with tired eyes and hands roughened by work. Mrs. Morrison? She looked up, startled. Yes? My name's Ryder Callow. I wanted to ask you about your farm. What happened when Calvin Ward took it? Her face went pale. I can't talk about that. Why not? Because I need this job. My husband, we need this job. If Mr. Ward finds out I've been talking to people, he'll make sure I lose it. Ward doesn't own the hotel. He doesn't have to. He owns enough of this town that one word from him and I'm out. Alice glanced down the hallway nervously. Please, I can't help you. Can't or won't. What's the difference? Her voice cracked. We lost everything. The farm, the equipment, 20 years of work. We're living on my wages and whatever my husband can earn when he's sober enough to work, which isn't often anymore. I can't afford to lose what little we have left. Ryder softened his tone. I'm not trying to make things harder for you. I'm trying to stop Ward from doing this to anyone else. Then you're going to fail. Alice grabbed a stack of towels from her cart, holding them against her chest like a shield. Ward's too powerful. He's got too many people protecting him. You're just one man. What can you possibly do? I don't know yet, but I'm going to try. Trying gets you killed. She started walking away, then stopped and looked back. The papers were wrong. The foreclosure notice said we missed 4 payments, but we never missed a single one. I have the receipts, kept them in a box under the bed. But when Ward's lawyers came, they said our receipts didn't match the bank's records, so ours didn't matter. It was like reality stopped existing and only paperwork mattered. Her eyes were shining now. My husband went to Sheriff Holbrook, showed him the receipts, asked him to investigate. You know what Holbrook said? He said without the original bank records, there was nothing he could do. Said we should take it to civil court if we wanted, but that would cost money we didn't have. So we lost everything, and Ward walked away with our land for a fraction of what it was worth. Yes, Tracy, do you still have those receipts? Why? What good would they do? They proved the bank's records were altered. Alice's laugh was bitter. We already tried that. Nobody cared. I care. She studied him, hope and disbelief warring on her face. You really think you can stop him? I think if enough people tell their stories, if enough proof piles up, someone will have to listen. Or you'll end up like the Corrigan place, burned to the ground with nobody held accountable. Maybe, but doing nothing guarantees Ward wins. At least this way there's a chance. Alice was quiet for a long time, chewing on her lip. Then, the receipts are at our room. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Come by tonight after my shift ends, 8 o'clock. I'll show you what I have. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. All I'm giving you is paper. That's never been enough before. She walked away, her cart squeaking, disappearing into another room. Ryder stood in the hallway, adding another piece to the puzzle forming in his mind. Bank records that didn't match the receipts. Foreclosures that happened impossibly fast, a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. Somewhere in this system was the proof, the document that would break it all open. The signature that didn't match, the date that was impossible, the number that had been changed. He just had to find it before Ward found him. The rest of the day passed in careful observation. Ryder walked the town, noting the layout, identifying exits and alleyways, watching the way people moved and talked and avoided certain buildings. He saw Turner twice more, once entering the bank, once standing outside the Ward Cattle Company headquarters, talking to two men who had the look of hired muscle. He saw Sheriff Holbrook making his rounds, nodding at shopkeepers, pointedly not noticing anything that might require actual law enforcement. He saw the town functioning like everything was fine while underneath the surface, fear and silence did Ward's work for him. By the time evening came, Ryder had mapped the place in his head. Every street, every building that mattered, every person who seemed to carry weight. He ate dinner at a small restaurant where nobody talked to him, then returned to the hotel as the sun was setting. At 8 o'clock, he knocked on the door at the end of the third-floor hallway. Alice Morrison opened it, glancing past him to make sure no one was watching. "Come in, quickly." The room was small and shabby, furnished with cast-off furniture and lit by a single lamp. A man sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He didn't look up when Ryder entered. "My husband, James," Alice said quietly. "He hasn't been the same since we lost the farm." James Morrison might have been 40 or 60, hard to tell with the way alcohol and defeat had aged him. He had the hollowed-out look of someone who'd given up on everything, including himself. Alice pulled a wooden box from under the bed, setting it on the small table. Inside were papers, receipts, letters, notices, organized with the same careful precision Lena used in her office. "Every payment we made," Alice said, spreading them out, 48 months' worth. Never late, never short. The bank gave us a receipt each time. See? Dated, signed by Gerald Kincaid himself. Ryder examined the receipts. They were exactly what she'd described. Formal bank documents with dates, amounts, and signatures. The foreclosure notice said you missed payments in January, February, March, and April of last year. We didn't. Alice pulled out 4 receipts, laying them beside each other. Those are the payments they claimed we missed, all documented, all signed. What did the bank say when you showed them these? Kincaid said they must be forgeries, said someone could have easily faked his signature. Her voice shook with old anger. These are his receipts, from his bank, with his signature. But he called them forgeries and nobody questioned him. Ryder studied the signatures under the lamplight. They looked genuine to him, the same fluid handwriting across all of them, none of the hesitation or inconsistency you'd see in a forgery. "Can I borrow these? I'll return them." Alice's hand hovered over the receipts protectively. "They're all I have left. Proof that we weren't lying. I understand, but I need to show them to someone who might be able to use them. I promise I'll take care of them." She looked at her husband, who still hadn't moved or acknowledged anyone's presence, then back at Ryder. "If you lose them, I won't." She carefully gathered the receipts, placing them back in the box and handing it to him. "Find something, please. We can't be the only ones with proof like this. If the bank's records were altered for us, they were altered for the others too." "That's what I'm counting on." Ryder left with the box under his arm, walking quickly through the darkening hallway. He'd just reached the stairs when a voice stopped him. "Mr. Callow." He turned. Mason Drake stood at the other end of the hall, backlit by the window so his face was in shadow. He was tall and solid, with the kind of build that came from real work, not exercise. His clothes were dusty from a day in the field, and he carried himself with the stillness of someone who'd learned not to waste movement. "We should talk," Drake said. "About what?" "About the smart thing to do." Drake walked closer, his boots quiet on the worn carpet. "You're asking questions that are making my employer nervous. That's bad for you. I'll take my chances." "No, you won't. You'll listen." Drake stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I know what you're trying to do. I know you think you're helping, but you're not. You're just making things worse for everyone. Worse than losing their homes?" "Yes, because when you push, Ward pushes back. And when he pushes back, people get hurt. Not you. You'll ride away eventually. But the people who live here, who can't leave, who are trying to survive in whatever way they can, they're the ones who'll pay for your righteousness." Ryder felt anger rising in his chest. "So I should just let him keep stealing?" "You should recognize when a fight's already lost and walk away before you get people killed."
Like the Corrigans? Drake's jaw tightened. That was an accident. You believe that?
It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what you do next. Drake's voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it. Not quite threat, not quite warning. Something else. Go back to wherever you came from. Forget about Harrow's Crossing. Nobody here wants your help. Some people do.
The people you're talking to, they're scared. They'll tell you what you want to hear because they think you can fix things, but you can't. All you can do is make Ward more aggressive, and then everyone suffers. And you're fine with that, fine with being part of it. Drake's expression went cold. I do my job. I don't apologize for it. Your job is destroying families. My job is following orders. What those orders mean, what they cost, that's not my concern. That's convenient. That's survival. Drake stepped closer, his voice dropping. You want to know the truth? Ward's going to take this valley whether you fight him or not. The only question is how much blood gets spilled in the process. You walk away, maybe he's satisfied with what he's got. You keep pushing, he'll burn every farm between here and the county line just to prove a point. So ask yourself, is your pride worth that? Ryder held his ground, the box of receipts heavy under his arm. I'm not doing this for pride. Then what? Because someone has to. Drake looked at him for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been regret or recognition or just exhaustion. You're going to get yourself killed. Or worse, say, you're going to get other people killed. And when it's over, Ward will still own this valley, and you'll have accomplished nothing except adding more bodies to the count. We'll see. Yeah. Drake's voice went flat. We will. He turned and walked away, descending the stairs without looking back. Ryder stood in the hallway, his heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. That hadn't been a threat. Not exactly. It had been something stranger. A warning that sounded almost like Drake didn't want to make it, like he was following a script he didn't believe in anymore. Something was there. Some crack in the armor.
He'd have to figure out how to widen it. But not tonight. Tonight he needed to get these receipts somewhere safe and start connecting the pieces. He returned to his room, locked the door, and spread the receipts across the bed. 48 payments, all documented, all signed. If Alice Morrison had these, the other families probably had similar records. And if all of them showed payments that the bank claimed never happened, that was evidence of systematic fraud, the kind of evidence that could bring down an empire, if he could get it to the right people, if he could stay alive long enough. Ryder lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Mason Drake's warning, about Harold Mercer's burned field, about Jonah's clenched fists and Lena's careful documentation and Alice Morrison's tired eyes, about all the people caught in Ward's machine, ground down and spit out while everyone else looked away. He'd walked away before, too many times. Let other people's problems stay other people's problems because getting involved meant bleeding and he'd already bled enough. But not this time. This time he was staying, even if Drake was right, and it got him killed. Even if it accomplished nothing. At least he'd know he tried. Outside, Harrow's Crossing settled into darkness, and somewhere in that darkness, Calvin Ward's empire continued its expansion. But cracks were starting to show. And cracks were all Ryder needed. Dawn broke gray and uncertain, clouds massing over the eastern hills like something gathering strength. Ryder woke to the sound of rain beginning to patter against the window, soft at first, then harder, steady, and insistent. He lay there for a moment listening to it, thinking about water and what it did, how it found cracks, worked its way in, split things apart from the inside. That's what he needed to do, find the crack and widen it. He dressed quickly, strapped on his gun belt, and tucked the box of receipts into his saddlebag. The hotel was quiet, most guests still asleep or not yet stirring. He descended the stairs carefully, avoiding the ones that creaked, and stepped out into the rain. The street was empty, water already beginning to pool in the wheel ruts and low spots. Ryder pulled his hat down and walked to the livery stable, where Comet greeted him with a reproachful look that said he didn't appreciate being saddled in weather like this. You and me both, Ryder muttered, tightening the cinch. He rode out of town, heading south, following a route Lena had sketched for him the day before. Back roads and farm trails that would keep him away from the main thoroughfares where Ward's men might be watching. The rain made everything harder, turning the dirt to mud that sucked at Comet's hooves and reduced visibility to 100 yards in any direction. It took 3 hours to reach the neighboring county seat, a town called Millbrook that was twice the size of Harrow's Crossing and seemed to have avoided Ward's influence, at least for now. Ryder found the courthouse, tied Comet under a covered walkway, and went inside dripping water across the marble floor. The records office was on the second floor, staffed by a bored-looking clerk who barely glanced up from his newspaper when Ryder entered. "Help you? I need to see property records for Harrow's Crossing, specifically mortgage documentation and foreclosure proceedings from the last 2 years. The clerk set down his paper, suddenly more interested. "You a lawyer?" "No." "Then what's your business?" "Personal research." "These are public records?" "They are." The clerk studied him for a moment, then shrugged and stood. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room, returning 15 minutes later with a stack of ledgers and file folders. "Everything related to Harrow's Crossing for the past 2 years. You can use that table. No removing documents from the building, no marking or damaging the records." "Understood." Ryder spent the next 4 hours going through the files page by page, comparing dates and signatures and transaction details. The territorial records showed the same pattern Lena had identified, a steady stream of foreclosures all tied to the Harrow's Crossing Bank and Trust, all purchased immediately by Calvin Ward through various corporate entities. But there were discrepancies, small ones easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. A foreclosure dated March 15th in the county records, but March 17th in what would have been filed locally. A signature that looked slightly different from one document to the next. Transaction amounts that were rounded to different decimal places. The kind of inconsistencies that suggested someone had been creating documents in one place and filing slightly different versions in another, counting on the fact that most people would never compare them. Ryder copied the relevant details into a notebook he'd bought from the Mercantile, working methodically through each case. Henderson, Pritchard, Yates, Morrison, Kellerman, Corrigan, Mercer. 7 families, 7 sets of documents that didn't quite match. By the time he finished, the rain had stopped, and afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the wet streets to steam. Ryder returned the files, thanked the clerk, and stepped back outside feeling like he'd finally found solid ground. The discrepancies weren't proof of fraud by themselves, but combined with the receipts from Alice Morrison and testimony from the families, they were enough to raise serious questions, enough to force a real investigation maybe, enough to at least slow Ward down, if he could get it to someone who'd listen. The ride back to Harrow's Crossing took longer than the trip out, Comet picking his way carefully through the mud, while Ryder turned the problem over in his mind. The territorial governor was the logical choice, outside the local power structure, authority to override county officials, resources to conduct a proper investigation. But getting the evidence to the governor meant traveling to the capital, which was 4 days north, and leaving that long meant abandoning Lena and anyone else who might be targets. He needed help. Someone local who had authority and wasn't in Ward's pocket. The problem was he didn't know who that person might be, or if they even existed. He was still wrestling with it when he reached the outskirts of Harrow's Crossing and saw smoke rising from somewhere near the center of town. Not the slow, controlled smoke of cooking fires or stoves. The thick, angry smoke of something burning that shouldn't be. Ryder urged Comet into a trot, then a canter, mud flying from the horses' hooves as they raced toward town. The smoke was coming from the east side, near the feed store, black and heavy against the clearing sky. By the time he reached the scene, a crowd had gathered. The building next to the feed store, a small boarding house, was engulfed in flames, fire roaring through the windows and up through the collapsing roof. People stood back from the heat, watching helplessly as the structure burned. Ryder dismounted, pushing through the crowd. "Is anyone inside?" "Don't think so," someone said. Place was mostly empty. "What happened?" "Don't know. Fire just started about an hour ago." Ryder scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. He spotted the feed store owner, the man who directed him to the Yates family yesterday, standing with his arms crossed and his face grim. "The Yateses?" Ryder asked when he reached him. The man shook his head. "They're fine. They weren't in the building when it started, but all their things were." "Where are they now?" "Gone. Took off the moment they saw the flames. Peter Yates said they were leaving town, said this was a message, and he wasn't waiting around for the next one." Ryder felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't an accident. The feed store owner looked at him with tired, knowing eyes. Of course it wasn't, but try proving that. By the time the sheriff gets here, there won't be anything left but ash, and the official report will say it was faulty wiring or a knocked-over lamp, same as it always is. Ryder looked at the burning building, thinking about Drake's warning last night. You keep pushing, he'll burn every farm between here and the county line just to prove a point. Ward wasn't wasting time. He was sending a message, making sure everyone understood what happened to people who talked. The feed store owner moved closer, his voice dropping. You should leave, today. Whatever you're doing, it's making things worse. Running won't stop him. Maybe not, but it'll keep you alive. Ryder didn't answer. He stood watching the fire until the roof finally collapsed in a shower of sparks, and the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their lives with the practiced numbness of those who'd learned not to care too much about things they couldn't control. By the time Sheriff Holbrook arrived with 2 deputies, there was nothing left to investigate, just smoldering ruins and the smell of burnt wood heavy in the afternoon air. Holbrook walked the perimeter, making a show of examining the scene, then declared it looked like an accidental fire started by careless handling of lamp oil. Nobody argued, nobody asked questions. The deputies wrote it up, and that was that. Ryder watched from across the street, his jaw tight, anger burning in his chest, hotter than the fire had been. He found Lena Hart at the county clerk's office, sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. She looked up when he entered, her eyes red.
You heard? I saw. They're gone. The Yateses. They were the only family that stayed after what happened to the Corrigans, and now they're gone too. Her voice cracked. This is because of us. Because I've been asking questions. Because you've been pushing. Ward's making examples.
Ryder set his saddlebag on her desk, pulling out the notebook and the box of receipts. Then we make it count. I went to Millbrook, checked the territorial records. There are discrepancies, dates that don't match, signatures that vary, transaction details that differ between local and territorial filings. It's not conclusive proof, but combined with these receipts and testimony from the families, it's enough to force an investigation. Lena looked at the materials, then back at him. You really think that matters? You saw what just happened. Ward burned a building in broad daylight, and nobody's going to do anything about it. What makes you think anyone will care about mismatched dates in property records? Because property fraud is federal jurisdiction. If we can show a pattern of systematic mortgage fraud tied to railroad speculation, the territorial governor has to act. He can't ignore it. He can if Ward's lawyers bury it in appeals and delays and procedural challenges. They've done it before. Not with this much documentation, not with witnesses willing to testify. What witnesses? Lena's voice rose. The Yateses are gone. Alice Morrison is terrified. The Corrigans disappeared. Harold Mercer left for Silver Ridge yesterday. Who's going to testify? Who's going to stand up in court and accuse Calvin Ward of fraud when they know what happens to people who oppose him? Ryder had no answer for that. She was right. The witnesses were scattered or silenced, and anyone who remained was too frightened to speak. Without testimony, the documentary evidence was interesting but not definitive, not enough to overcome Ward's lawyers and political connections. They needed someone from inside, someone who knew how the fraud worked and could explain it in detail that couldn't be disputed or dismissed. They needed Mason Drake. The realization settled over Ryder with the weight of inevitability. Drake was the key. He supervised all of Ward's property operations, handled the foreclosures, knew where every document came from and every payment went. If he could be convinced to talk, to turn against Ward and provide detailed testimony about how the system worked, that would be enough. That would break the whole thing open.
The problem was Drake had no reason to talk.
He was loyal, well-paid, and personally involved in everything Ward had done. Turning on his employer meant admitting his own guilt, facing potential criminal charges, destroying whatever life he'd built here. Why would he do that? I need to find Drake, Ryder said.
Why?
He won't help you. I told you. I've tried talking to him.
I know, but something he said last night. Ryder paused, trying to articulate the instinct he'd felt during their conversation. He warned me off, told me to leave, but the way he said it, it wasn't just threat. It was almost like he didn't want to have to follow through. Or he was softening you up before Ward makes his move. Maybe, but I don't think so. Ryder remembered the flicker of something behind Drake's eyes, the flatness in his voice when he said, "That's survival." "I think he's tired. I think he's done things he regrets and doesn't know how to stop." Even if that's true, regret doesn't make people brave. It just makes them miserable. Then maybe he needs a reason to be brave. Lena looked at him like he was crazy. "You're going to try to recruit Ward's head enforcer."
"I'm going to try to give him a way out." "That's insane." "Probably, but it's the only play we have left." Lena was quiet for a long moment, chewing on her lip. Then she opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a folder, sliding it across to Ryder. "What's this?"
"Everything I have on Mason Drake. Where he lives, where he drinks, his work schedule, his habits. I've been documenting Ward's people the same way I document the transactions." She met his eyes. "If you're really going to do this, you should at least know who you're dealing with." Ryder opened the folder. Inside were notes written in Lena's precise handwriting, details accumulated over months of observation. Drake lived alone in a cabin about 2 miles outside town. He drank at the saloon most nights, but never more than 2 whiskeys. He worked long hours, often 7 days a week. He had no friends that Lena could identify, no family in the area, no social ties beyond his employment with Ward. A ghost, like Lena had said. A man who'd stripped his life down to nothing but work, as if having nothing made it easier to do the things required of him. "There's something else," Lena said quietly. 3 years ago, Drake had a farm of his own. Small operation, just him and his wife. She died in childbirth, the baby too. Drake couldn't keep up with the mortgage on his own, and Ward foreclosed. Instead of forcing him out, Ward offered him a job. That's how he became Ward's supervisor. Ryder felt the pieces click into place. Drake wasn't just an enforcer. He was a victim who'd been turned into an instrument of the same system that destroyed him. Ward had broken him, then rebuilt him as something useful, giving him purpose through the very mechanism that had taken everything from him. Does he know Ward did the same thing to him? The manufactured foreclosure? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's easier to believe it was legitimate, that he really did fail, than to admit he's been working for the man who destroyed his life. Either way, he knows what Ward does. He knows it's wrong. Knowing and doing something about it are different things. Yeah, Ryder closed the folder. They are. He left the office as evening was settling over the valley, shadows stretching long across the muddy streets. The crowd from the fire had dispersed completely now, leaving only the charred skeleton of the boarding house and the lingering smell of smoke. Ryder retrieved Comet from where he'd tied him and rode out of town, following Lena's directions toward Drake's cabin. The route took him along a narrow trail that wound through scrub oak and limestone outcrops, the ground still soft from the morning rain. By the time he reached the cabin, full dark had fallen and a thin moon was rising in the east. The cabin was small and spare, set back from the trail with no neighbors in sight. A single window showed lamplight inside. Smoke rose from the chimney, gray against the black sky. Ryder dismounted and tied Comet to a tree, then approached the cabin on foot. He made no effort to hide his approach. Stealth would just make things worse, and knocked firmly on the door. The lamplight shifted as someone moved inside. Then the door opened and Mason Drake stood there, silhouetted against the interior glow, holding a rifle loosely in one hand. "I told you to leave," Drake said. "I know. So why are you here?" "Because I need to talk to you, and because I think you need to talk to someone." Drake's expression was unreadable. "You're either brave or stupid." "Probably both." For a moment, Ryder thought Drake might just shoot him and be done with it. But instead the man stepped back, gesturing with the rifle. "Come in, but if you try anything, I'll put you down without hesitation." "Understood." The interior of the cabin was as sparse as its exterior. A single room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stove. No decorations, no personal items, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here rather than just existed. Drake set the rifle against the wall within easy reach and sat in one of the chairs, gesturing for Ryder to take the other. "Say what you came to say." Ryder sat, keeping his hands visible on the table. "You warned me last night that pushing Ward would make things worse. You were right. He burned the Yates place this afternoon. They've left town. I heard. That doesn't bother you? My job is to follow orders, not to be bothered by consequences." "Is it?" Ryder leaned forward slightly.
Because the way you talked last night, it sounded like those consequences do bother you. You just don't know what to do about it. Drake's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know you had a farm once. I know you lost it to foreclosure. I know Ward gave you a job afterward, and now you help him do to other families what was done to you. Something dangerous flickered in Drake's eyes. Be very careful how you talk to me. Why? Because the truth makes you angry? Or because you already know it and hearing it out loud makes it harder to ignore? Drake stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. Get out. Ryder stayed seated. What happened to your mortgage? When you couldn't keep up with the payments after your wife died, did everything happen by the book? Or were there discrepancies? Dates that didn't match, payments that got misrecorded, documents that appeared after the fact? I said, get out. Because if what happened to you was the same thing that's happening to these other families, then you've been working for the man who destroyed your life. You've been helping him do it to others, and you know it. Drake moved fast, grabbing Ryder by the shirt and hauling him to his feet. You don't know what I know. You don't know what I've lived with. You ride into town playing hero, and you think you understand how the world works, but you don't. You don't understand what it costs to survive when everything's been taken from you. Then tell me, why? So you can feel righteous? So you can add my story to your collection of evidence and ride off to the Capitol feeling like you made a difference? Drake's grip tightened. I made my choices. I live with them. That's more than most people can say. Living with them and being at peace with them are different things. Drake shoved him backward. Ryder stumbled but caught himself, keeping his hands away from his weapons. You need to leave, Drake said, his voice rough. Now. Before I do something we'll both regret. I'm not here to fight you. Then what are you here for? To offer you a way out. Drake laughed, bitter and sharp. A way out. You think there's a way out from this? I think you're tired of doing Ward's dirty work. I think you're tired of being the instrument of the same system that broke you. I think if you had a choice, a real choice, you'd take it. There's always a choice. I made mine. Then make a different one. Ryder kept his voice steady, calm. Help me stop him. Testify about how the foreclosures work, provide documentation, explain the system from the inside. With your testimony, we can prove systematic fraud. We can bring Ward down and stop this from happening to anyone else. And what happens to me? You face consequences, criminal charges probably, but you also get to stop being the person you've become. You get to be someone who chose to do the right thing even when it cost him. Drake turned away, staring at the wall. You're asking me to destroy myself. I'm asking you to save yourself. There's a difference. The silence stretched between them, heavy and tense. Ryder could see the war happening inside Drake, the exhaustion and guilt fighting against fear and self-preservation. He'd pushed as hard as he could. Now he had to wait and see which side won. Finally, Drake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the same. My foreclosure. I didn't realize it at the time, but later, after I'd been working for Ward for a few months, after I'd seen how he operated, I went back and looked at my own documents. The dates were wrong. Payments I knew I'd made weren't recorded. The timeline didn't make sense. He turned back to face Ryder. He did to me exactly what he's been doing to everyone else. And when I figured it out, I was already too deep to get out. You can get out now. Can I? You know what happens to people who betray Calvin Ward? You saw the Corrigan place. You saw what happened today. That's why we need to move fast. Get the evidence to the territorial governor before Ward knows what's happening. Once it's official, once federal investigators are involved, he can't just make it disappear. Drake rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking older and more tired than his years. Even if I wanted to help you, and I'm not saying I do, what you're asking for doesn't exist. Ward doesn't keep incriminating documents lying around. Everything that matters is locked in his personal safe at the ranch, and nobody gets access to that except him and his lawyer. Then we get into the safe. That's insane. Maybe. But it's possible. It's suicide. Ward's ranch is staffed around the clock. Armed men, guard dogs, the works. Even if you could get past all that, the safe is in his private study, which is on the second floor of a house with exactly one staircase. You'd be trapped. So we need a distraction, something big enough to pull everyone's attention somewhere else. Drake stared at him. You're serious. I'm serious.
You're going to get yourself killed, and probably me with you. Or we stop him. Those are the options. Drake was quiet for a long time, the lamplight casting shadows across his weathered face. Then, there's a cattle auction in 3 days. Ward's hosting it at the ranch, buyers from all over the territory. Big event, lots of people, lots of chaos. Security will be focused on the auction grounds and the money. The house will be less guarded than usual. Can you get me inside? I supervise property operations, not security, but I know the layout, know the routines. If you're actually crazy enough to try this, I can draw you a map. And the safe. Combination safe, mounted to the floor. I don't know the combination, but Ward's meticulous about records. If it's written down anywhere, it'll be in his personal ledger, and he keeps that in his desk. Ryder felt the plan taking shape. Dangerous and desperate, but possible. What about you? Where will you be? Far away from the ranch when it happens. I can't be anywhere near this. If Ward suspects I was involved, I'm dead before you could get any evidence to the governor. Fair enough. But after, if we get the documents, if this works, you'll need to come forward, testify about what you know. Drake's hands curled into fists on the table. If I do this, if I help you, and Ward isn't stopped, he'll kill me. You understand that? Not arrest me, not run me out of town. Kill me. I know. And you think your evidence and your righteousness will be enough to protect me? I think doing the right thing is its own protection. Not always, but sometimes. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be, it's just true. Drake looked at him for a long moment, then pulled a piece of paper and a pencil from a drawer. I'm going to regret this. Probably. But I'm going to do it anyway. He started sketching, his hand moving with practiced precision. Because you're right. I am tired. I'm tired of being the person I've become. I'm tired of looking in the mirror and seeing someone I don't recognize. I'm tired of lying to myself that I'm just following orders and that makes it okay. He finished the sketch and slid it across the table, a detailed layout of the ranch house, including the location of the study, the safe, and the guard positions. Here's your map. Now tell me how you plan to not get killed. They talked for 2 hours, working through every detail of the plan. Drake knew Ward's operation inside and out, knew the schedules and routines and weak points. The cattle auction would bring 50 or more buyers to the ranch, along with their hands and associates. Security would be focused on the livestock pens and the money room where transactions would be processed. The house would be lightly guarded, maybe 2 men, maybe none if they got pulled to deal with any problems at the auction. The study was on the 2nd floor, accessed by the main staircase. The safe was behind a painting of some historical battle scene Drake couldn't remember the name of. Ward's ledger would be in the desk drawer, left side, probably locked but easy to force. Getting in meant timing the approach perfectly, late enough that the auction was in full swing, early enough that the house staff hadn't locked down for the night. Getting out meant having a clear exit route and enough of a head start that Ward's men couldn't catch up before Ryder reached neutral ground. The biggest problem, Drake said, is that even if you get the documents, you're 3 days from the capital. Ward has connections all along the route. If he realizes what you've taken and where you're going, he can get men ahead of you, set up an ambush, make sure you never reach the governor. Then I don't go to the capital. I go to the nearest telegraph office and wire the Territorial Marshal Service directly. Get federal officers involved immediately. Telegraph office is in Millbrook. That's 3 hours from here. Better than 3 days. Drake nodded slowly. It might work. If everything goes perfectly. If you don't get caught, don't get shot, and manage to outride anyone Ward sends after you. And if I do? Then at least I tried. Drake's expression was grim. For what it's worth, I hope you make it. I hope this works. I hope we actually stop him. We will. You sound certain. I'm not. But certainty doesn't matter. Commitment does. Drake stood, extending his hand. Ryder shook it. The grip was firm, deliberate, the handshake of 2 men agreeing to something dangerous and possibly fatal. 3 days, Drake said. The auction starts at noon. Security shift change happens at 2. That's your window. I'll be ready. You better be, because if you're not, we're both dead. Ryder left the cabin with the map folded in his pocket and a plan that had too many variables and not enough safety margins. He rode back toward town through the darkness,
thinking about everything that could go wrong and trying not to dwell on the probability that most of it would. The town was quiet when he arrived, windows dark, streets empty. He stabled Comet and returned to his room, where he spread Drake's map on the bed and committed every detail to memory. The layout of the house, the location of the safe, the guard positions, the escape routes. 3 days. 3 days to prepare, to plan, to get ready for the kind of action that would either break Ward's empire or get Ryder killed trying. He thought about Harold Mercer's burned field and Jonah's clenched fists, about Alice Morrison's receipts and Lena Hart's careful documentation, about the Yates family fleeing their home and the Corrigan place burning in the night, about Mason Drake sitting alone in his cabin, finally choosing to fight back against the system that had destroyed him. 3 days. And then everything would change, one way or another. The first day passed in careful preparation. Ryder spent the morning riding the route between Ward's Ranch and Millbrook twice, memorizing every turn and landmark, identifying places where an ambush might be set, and alternate paths he could take if the main road was blocked. The land was rough in places, rock outcrops and dry creek beds that would slow a horse but could also provide cover, and he filed away every detail that might mean the difference between escape and capture. By afternoon, he was back in town, checking Comet's shoes at the livery and making sure the horse was rested and fed. The stable hand watched him with the wary curiosity of someone who'd learned not to ask questions but couldn't quite stop wondering. "You planning on leaving soon?" the man asked finally. "Maybe. Sooner might be better than later. Word is Mr. Ward's getting impatient with strangers asking questions." "I've heard that." The stable hand lowered his voice. "I'm just saying, people who make Ward impatient tend to have accidents, or they leave town real sudden-like, one or the other. Thanks for the warning." "Wasn't a warning. Was friendly advice. There's a difference." Ryder paid for another 2 days of stabling and left, walking back through town with his collar turned up and his hat pulled low. He'd become conscious of being watched, the kind of attention that made his shoulders itch and his hand drift toward his gun without thinking about it. Turner's men, probably, keeping track of his movements and reporting back. Let them watch. In 2 days it wouldn't matter. He found Lena at the county clerk's office, working through a stack of recent filings with the focused intensity of someone trying to lose themselves in routine. "Any trouble?" he asked. She looked up, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept much. "Define trouble. If you mean has anyone threatened me directly, then no. If you mean has the general atmosphere of menace increased significantly, then yes. Ward knows we're onto something." "Ward knows you're onto something. I'm just the clerk who keeps the records. As long as I don't do anything overt, I'm probably safe." She set down her pen. "Probably." Ryder pulled a chair over and sat. "The day after tomorrow, stay home. Lock your doors. Don't come to the office. Don't go out. Don't talk to anyone." "Why? What's happening the day after tomorrow?" "Better if you don't know the details. Just trust me. Stay inside and stay safe." Lena studied his face, reading something there that made her expression shift from worry to something closer to fear. "You're going after him. You're going to do something that can't be undone. I'm going to get proof. Real proof. The kind Ward can't talk his way out of." "How?" "I told you. Better if you don't know. In case they come asking questions afterward." Something like that. She was quiet for a moment, fingers drumming against the desk in an unconscious rhythm. Then, "If you get caught, they'll kill you. You know that, right? Not arrest you, not run you out of town. They'll kill you and bury the body somewhere it'll never be found." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I'm doing it anyway. Why?" The question came out almost plaintive. "You don't owe this town anything. You could leave right now and nobody would blame you. Why risk your life for people you don't even know?" Ryder thought about that, about all the towns he'd left behind and all the fights he'd walked away from, about the weight that accumulated over years of choosing survival over principle, safety over courage. "Because if not me, then who?" he said finally. "You can't do it. You don't have access or skills or backup. The families can't do it. They're scattered or scared or already broken. The law won't do it because the law is compromised. So it's me or it's nobody. And if it's nobody, Ward wins. And if Ward wins here, he wins everywhere, because men like him always do when nobody stops them." "That's not an answer. That's a justification." "Maybe. but it's the one I've got. Lena reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook, sliding it across to him. This is everything I know about Ward's operation. Names of his associates, businesses he controls, people who owe him money or favors. If something happens to me, if this goes wrong and Ward decides I'm a liability, I want someone to have this information. Someone who will make sure it gets to the right people. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that.
No, but I'm going to act like I do because the alternative is paralysis. She managed a weak smile. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. Yeah, probably.
He left her there, tucking the notebook into his jacket pocket next to Drake's map and the folded receipts from Alice Morrison. Pieces of evidence, fragments of proof, small weapons against a large machine. Not enough on their own, but maybe enough combined with what he'd find at Ward's ranch. If he found anything. If he survived long enough to get it to the authorities. If. The second day was worse than the first. The tension in town had ratcheted up several notches, a palpable unease that made people walk faster and talk quieter and avoid eye contact. Ryder caught glimpses of Ward's men on the street. Turner in his expensive suit, the red bandana man from the Mercer farm, others he didn't recognize but who had the same hard look of hired muscle. They weren't hiding anymore. That was the message. Whatever protection existed in pretense and deniability had been stripped away. Ward was making it clear he owned this town and everyone in it. Ryder stayed in his room most of the day, cleaning his revolvers and checking his ammunition, reviewing Drake's map until he could trace the route through Ward's house with his eyes closed. He tried to eat dinner at the restaurant, but his stomach was too tight. So he ended up just drinking coffee and watching the street through the window as evening shadows lengthened. Around 8 o'clock, someone knocked on his door. Ryder stood, hand on his gun, and called out. "Who is it?" "Me,"
Jonah Mercer's voice. Ryder opened the door to find the boy standing there, travel-worn and dusty, his eyes bright with something between determination and desperation. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Silver Ridge." "I came back." Jonah pushed past him into the room. "Grandpa's safe with my aunt. I told him I forgot something, said I'd catch up in a few days. He didn't believe me, but he was too tired to argue." "You need to go back." "No." The word came out flat, final. "I'm not running anymore. I'm not leaving while that man still owns our farm." "Jonah!" "Don't!" The boy's hands clenched into those familiar fists. "Don't tell me I'm too young, or it's too dangerous, or I should let the adults handle it. I watched my grandfather lose everything he built over 42 years. I watched our field burn. I watched us pack our whole lives into a wagon and leave like criminals even though we didn't do anything wrong. I'm not doing nothing while you try to stop Ward. I'm helping." Ryder wanted to argue, wanted to send the boy away for his own safety. But he saw something in Jonah's eyes that he recognized. The same stubborn refusal to accept injustice that had kept Ryder in this town when every rational voice said to leave. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know. Whatever you need. I can ride. I can shoot. Can you follow orders without question?" Jonah nodded immediately. "Yes. Even if those orders are to stay back, stay safe, and not do anything heroic?" The boy hesitated, then nodded again. "If that's what you need me to do, good. Because here's what's going to happen tomorrow." Ryder laid out the plan, or at least the parts of it Jonah needed to know. The cattle auction at Ward's ranch, the window of opportunity during the security shift change, the ride to Millbrook with the evidence. What he didn't mention was breaking into the house, cracking the safe, or the very real possibility that none of this would work. "I need you in Millbrook," Ryder said, "at the telegraph office, waiting. If I show up with documents, you help me send wires to every federal authority we can reach, territorial marshal, governor's office, land management bureau, everyone. We flood the system so fast Ward can't contain it. And if you don't show up, then you wait 2 hours past when you're supposed to hear from me and you ride north to Silver Ridge. You tell your grandfather everything, and you tell him to get the family out of the territory. Can you do that?" Jonah's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "I can do that." "Good. Get some rest. We leave before dawn." The boy left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Ryder sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of what he'd just done.
Jonah was 16 years old, and Ryder had just made him part of a plan that could get them both killed. But the alternative was sending him away, and the boy would just find another way to get involved, probably something more dangerous and less controlled. At least this way, Ryder could keep him out of the worst of it. At least he could try. Sleep came in fits and starts, his mind too active to settle, playing through scenarios and contingencies. What if the safe was empty? What if Ward had moved the documents? What if Drake had betrayed him and the whole thing was a trap? What if? He finally gave up around 4 in the morning and dressed in the darkness, strapping on his gun belt and checking his weapons one final time. Everything was loaded, cleaned, ready. He packed light, just what he'd need for a hard ride, nothing that would slow him down. Jonah was waiting at the livery stable when Ryder arrived, looking young and scared and trying very hard to hide both. They saddled their horses in silence, working by lamplight while the stable hand watched with knowing eyes but didn't ask questions. "You boys be careful," the man said as they led their horses out. "Plan to," Ryder replied. "Plans don't always work out." "No, they don't." They rode out of town as dawn was just beginning to pale the eastern sky, taking a route that would bring Jonah to Millbrook while keeping Ryder on track for Ward's ranch. For the first hour they rode together, not talking much, just the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. When they reached the fork where their paths diverged, Ryder pulled up and turned to the boy. "Remember, you wait at the telegraph office. I should be there by 4 o'clock. If I'm not there by 6, you ride north and don't look back." "I'll remember." "And Jonah?" Ryder waited until the boy met his eyes. "What you're doing, being the safety net, making sure the information gets out even if I don't make it, that's not less important than what I'm doing. It's more important. Because none of this matters if we can't get the evidence to people who can act on it. You understand?" Jonah nodded, his throat working. "I understand." "Good. Now get going, and be safe." The boy turned his horse and rode east toward Millbrook, not looking back. Ryder watched until he was out of sight, then turned west toward Ward's ranch and whatever waited there. The sun was climbing toward noon when Ryder reached the ridge overlooking Ward's property. The ranch spread out below like a small kingdom. Main house, barns, bunkhouses, corrals, all of it organized with the precision of serious money and serious ambition. The cattle pens were already filling with livestock, and he could see wagons and riders arriving from multiple directions, buyers and sellers gathering for the auction. Ryder found a spot with good cover and decent sight lines, dismounted, and settled in to wait. Drake had said the security shift change happened at 2 o'clock. That gave him time to observe the patterns, identify the guards, look for any deviations from what Drake had described. The ranch was busy, exactly as Drake had predicted. Men moved between the pens and the main house, carrying papers and cash boxes, coordinating the auction. The house itself seemed less guarded. Ryder counted only 2 men on the grounds, both focused on the front approach rather than the sides or back. At 1:45, Mason Drake appeared from one of the barns, walking with that same deliberate efficiency Ryder had seen before. He crossed toward the auction area, stopped to talk with one of the guards, then continued on without looking toward the ridge where Ryder was hidden. The guard Drake had spoken to checked his pocket watch, said something to his partner, and both men walked toward the bunkhouses. A few minutes later, 2 different men emerged and took up positions near the front of the house. Shift change, exactly as scheduled. Ryder waited another 10 minutes, making sure the new guards settled into their routine, then led Comet down the far side of the ridge, using a route that would keep him out of sight from the main compound. He circled wide, approaching the house from the rear where Drake's map showed the servants' entrance. The door was unlocked, another detail Drake had provided. Ryder slipped inside, finding himself in a narrow hallway that smelled like flour and bacon grease. Kitchen to his left, servants' stairs to his right. He took the stairs, climbing quietly, every sense stretched tight. The second floor was elegant in a way that felt aggressive, everything expensive and meant to be noticed. Thick carpet that muffled his footsteps. Oil paintings on the walls showing pastoral scenes that had probably never existed. Furniture that cost more than most families earned in a year. The study was third door on the left, exactly where Drake had said. Ryder tried the handle, locked, and pulled out the thin strip of metal he'd prepared for this. The lock was good, but not exceptional, the kind designed to keep out servants and casual intruders rather than professionals. It took him maybe 30 seconds to pop it. Inside, the study matched the rest of the house. Oversized desk, leather chairs, more paintings, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes that looked like they'd never been read. And there, on the wall behind the desk, a painting of some cavalry charge that was probably meant to be inspiring but mostly just looked violent. Ryder moved the painting aside and found the safe, exactly as described. Combination lock, mounted flush to the wall, professional grade. He pulled out Drake's map, checking the notation about Ward's ledger, and opened the desk drawer. It was locked. Of course it was. He forced it with the same strip of metal, the wood splintering slightly as the lock gave way. Inside was a leather-bound book, pages filled with Ward's cramped handwriting, dates, transactions, notes about meetings and deals and leverage. And there, on the inside cover, a series of numbers that looked random but weren't. The safe combination. Ryder's hands were steadier than he expected as he spun the dial, aligning the numbers in sequence. Click, click, click. The final tumbler fell and the handle turned. Inside the safe was everything Drake had promised, and more. Ledgers showing the real financial structure of Ward's operations. Correspondence with the railroad company proving Ward had inside knowledge of their expansion plans. Contracts with shell companies set up to obscure property ownership. Letters to Gerald Kincaid at the bank, discussing how to structure foreclosures to look legitimate while actually being manufactured. And most damning of all, a handwritten summary, in Ward's own writing, laying out the entire scheme, which farms to target, which families would be easiest to push out, how much profit to expect when the railroad came through and land values tripled. It was all there, everything they needed. Ryder pulled out as much as he could carry, stuffing documents into his jacket and saddlebags. He was so focused on the papers that he almost didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. Almost. He froze, listening. 2 sets of footsteps moving with purpose. Voices, low and urgent. Swear I heard something up here. Probably just the house settling. This place creaks like an old ship. Check anyway. Mr. Ward was real clear about security today. The footsteps were coming closer. Ryder looked around the study, calculating options. The window was too high and too visible. He'd never make it down without being seen. The door was the only exit, and there were men in the hallway approaching it. Under the desk was too obvious. The tall wardrobe against the wall was possible, but risky. The door handle started to turn. Ryder did the only thing he could think of. He stepped behind the door as it swung open, pressing himself flat against the wall in the narrow space between door and frame. 2 men entered, both armed, both scanning the room. One of them was the red bandana man from the Mercer farm. The other was younger, nervous, his hand on his pistol grip. See? Nothing here, the younger one said. Red bandana walked to the desk, noticed the forced drawer. Wait. What? Drawer's been jimmied. He crossed to the safe, saw it standing open. And the safe, someone's been in the safe. Should we get Turner, now, and find out who's on grounds that shouldn't be? The younger man ran out. Red bandana stayed, pulling his pistol and turning slowly, scanning the room more carefully now. Ryder waited until his man's back was turned, then moved. Not attacking, that would just create noise and bring more people running, but slipping out from behind the door and into the hallway while Red Bandana was focused on the safe. He made it 3 steps before someone shouted behind him, "Hey, stop!" Ryder ran. Down the hallway toward the servants' stairs, footsteps pounding behind him. A gunshot cracked, the bullet splintering wood somewhere to his left. He hit the stairs at a full run, taking them 3 at a time, nearly falling but catching himself on the railing. The kitchen was chaos. A cook screaming, servants scattering, and then he was through the back door and running across open ground toward where he'd left Comet. More shouts behind him, more gunshots. Something tugged at his jacket, too close, but he kept running, reaching the horse and swinging into the saddle in one practiced motion. Comet didn't need encouragement. The horse took off at a gallop, heading for the ridgeline and the cover beyond it. Behind them, the ranch exploded into activity. Men running for horses, orders being shouted, the organized chaos of a manhunt beginning. Ryder urged Comet faster, bending low over the horse's neck as they climbed the ridge. A bullet whined past his ear. Another kicked up dirt to his right. Then they were over the ridge and down the far side, temporarily out of sight, and Ryder turned Comet northeast toward Millbrook and safety. If they could reach it. If Ward's men didn't catch them first. The chase lasted 3 hours. Ryder could hear them behind him, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always there. Ward had committed serious resources to this, men who knew the land and had fresh horses at regular intervals. Ryder's only advantage was that he'd scouted the route and knew where he could cut corners, where he could use rough terrain to slow pursuers, where he could disappear long enough to gain a few precious minutes. Comet was tiring. Ryder could feel it in the way the horse's stride was shortening, breaths coming harder. They'd covered maybe 15 miles at a punishing pace and still had another 5 to go before Millbrook. He heard hoofbeats closing from behind and risked a glance back. 3 riders, maybe a quarter-mile distant, pushing their horses hard. They'd have seen him now, would know exactly where he was heading. Ryder made a decision. The main road would be faster but more exposed. The canyon route would add distance but provide cover and chances for ambush if it came to that. He turned Comet off the road and into the rocks, picking his way through narrow passages and dry stream beds, using every trick he'd learned over years of running from and toward trouble. The canyon twisted and doubled back on itself, the walls rising high enough to block direct sunlight. Ryder found a spot where the path narrowed to single file and dismounted, pulling Comet into a shallow alcove and drawing one of his revolvers. The riders came 2 minutes later, moving cautiously now, knowing they'd lost visual contact. Ryder waited until they were committed to the narrow passage, then stepped out. That's far enough. The lead rider pulled up hard, his horse rearing slightly. All 3 men went for their guns. I wouldn't, Ryder said, his revolver trained on the leader. You might get me, but I'll get at least 2 of you first. Question is which 2? The riders hesitated. They were hired men, not true believers, and the calculation was simple. They were getting paid to chase, not to die. He's got the documents, one of them said. Ward's going to want those back. Then Ward should have kept them locked up better. You know what he'll do if we come back empty-handed. Not my problem. The lead rider's jaw worked, anger and frustration warring with self-preservation. This isn't over. No, it's not. But you 3 are done chasing. Turn around, ride back. Tell Ward he's finished. He'll never let you reach Millbrook. Watch me. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the lead rider turned his horse, jerking his head at the others to follow. They rode back the way they'd come, slow and reluctant, casting looks over their shoulders. Ryder waited until they were out of sight, then remounted and continued northeast. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with him. That had been close. Too close. But he still had the documents, and Millbrook was only 3 miles away. He pushed Comet as hard as he dared, the tired horse giving everything it had left. The sun was dropping toward late afternoon when the town finally came into view, buildings clustered around a crossroads, the telegraph office visible by its distinctive tower. Jonah was waiting outside, pacing, his face going pale with relief when he saw Ryder approaching. I thought, when you were late, had some delays, come on. They practically fell through the telegraph office door. The operator looked up, startled, taking in Ryder's disheveled appearance and the desperation on both their faces. I need to send multiple wires, federal priority, territorial marshal, governor's office, land management bureau, every authority you can reach. The operator's eyes narrowed. That's going to cost... Ryder pulled out a handful of bills and dropped them on the counter. That cover it? Yes, sir. What's the message? Get your pencil ready. This is going to take a while. They spent the next hour composing and sending telegrams, each one documenting the evidence Ryder had taken from Ward's safe. Systematic mortgage fraud, conspiracy with banking officials, insider railroad speculation, arson and intimidation, names, dates, transaction details. Everything laid out in clear, undeniable terms. With each message that went out, Ryder felt the weight lifting slightly. This was it. The moment Ward's protection broke down, when the system he'd built to shield him became irrelevant against the weight of federal scrutiny. Last one sent, the operator said finally. Responses should start coming within the hour. Good. When they do, forward everything to the territorial marshal in the capital. Make sure he understands this is urgent. Will do. Ryder and Jonah stepped outside, both of them suddenly exhausted. They'd done it. The evidence was in official hands now, spreading through bureaucratic channels Ward couldn't control or corrupt. Is it over? Jonah asked. Not yet. But it started. The collapse. Ward's entire operation. It's all going to come down now. What happens to him? Federal investigation? Probably. Criminal charges? Prison? If the evidence holds up the way I think it will. Good. The word carried all of Jonah's grief and anger, distilled into one syllable. He deserves worse. Maybe. But this is what we've got. They stayed in Millbrook that night, taking rooms at a boarding house and sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of people who'd pushed themselves beyond exhaustion. When Ryder woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window and someone was knocking on his door. He opened it to find Jonah holding a newspaper, his eyes wide. It's everywhere, look! The front page carried the headline, Federal Investigation Launched into Harrow's Crossing Land Fraud. Below it, a detailed article describing the allegations against Calvin Ward, the evidence submitted to authorities, and the territorial marshal's announcement that a full investigation was underway. Ryder read it twice, making sure it was real. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling something he hadn't allowed himself to feel yet. Relief. They'd done it. Against all odds, against a system designed to protect men like Ward, they'd exposed the corruption and forced authorities to act. Over the next week, the story grew. Federal agents arrived in Harrow's Crossing and began interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing bank records, seizing documents. Gerald Kincaid was arrested on charges of banking fraud. James Turner fled town but was caught 2 counties over trying to cross into Mexico. And Calvin Ward, the man who'd seemed untouchable just days before, watched his empire collapse piece by piece. His shell companies were dissolved. His land claims were challenged and reversed. Families who'd been forced out were given legal standing to reclaim their properties or receive compensation. The whole elaborate structure he'd built, the network of lawyers and corrupt officials and intimidated citizens, unraveled under federal scrutiny. Sheriff Holbrook resigned, his complicity too obvious to deny. Mayor Pierce called for new elections. Judge Watson recused himself from anything related to property disputes and quietly announced his retirement. Mason Drake disappeared the day the federal agents arrived, vanishing south like he'd said he would. Ryder hoped the man had found whatever peace was available to someone carrying the weight Drake carried. 2 weeks after the raid on Ward's ranch, Ryder rode back to Harrow's Crossing. The town looked different, lighter somehow, like a burden had been lifted. People made eye contact on the street. Shops were open later. There was still fear, still damage that would take years to repair, but the suffocating atmosphere of Ward's control was gone. He found Lena Hart at the county clerk's office, working through a mountain of paperwork related to the property reversals. Mr. Callow. She stood, a genuine smile crossing her tired face. I wondered if you'd come back. Wanted to see how things were settling. Chaotically, but better. The federal investigators have been thorough. Almost vindictively so. Every transaction Ward touched is being examined. Every claim he made is being challenged. It's going to take months to sort out, but the families are getting their land back, or at least they're getting the chance to fight for it with actual legal support. The Mercers? Harold and Jonah are back. They're repairing the house, planning to replant in the spring. Jonah's been helping coordinate with the other families, making sure everyone knows their rights. That boy's found his purpose. And you? Busy, exhausted, but satisfied. She gestured at the stacks of files. This is what I wanted. Actual justice, not just documentation of injustice. It's messy and complicated and nowhere near finished, but it's happening. Ryder nodded, feeling that same satisfaction. It wasn't clean victory. Ward would likely spend years in legal battles. Some of his associates would escape justice. The damage he'd done couldn't be fully undone. But the system had been broken open. The corruption had been exposed. The people who'd been powerless now had a fighting chance. That was enough. It had to be. He left Lena to her work and rode out to the Mercer farm. Harold and Jonah were there, working on the porch, the old man directing while the boy hammered boards into place. Mr. Callow! Jonah dropped his hammer and came running over. You came back. Just passing through. Like hell you are. You saved this place. You saved all of us. I just got the ball rolling. You and your grandfather and Lena and everyone else, you're the ones doing the real work of rebuilding. Harold approached more slowly, his weathered face showing something that might have been gratitude or respect or just acknowledgement. We heard what you did. Breaking into Ward's ranch, stealing the evidence.
Outrunning his men, that took courage. Or stupidity. Both, probably. Harold held out his hand. Thank you. For not walking away when you could have. For fighting when nobody asked you to. For giving us back our home.
Ryder shook his hand, the grip familiar now. You would have done the same.
Maybe. Or maybe I would have stayed broken. Hard to say. Harold glanced back at the farm, at the burned field that was already showing signs of new growth. But because of you, I don't have to find out. We get to rebuild. That's a gift. They stood there for a moment, three men looking at land that represented more than just property. Survival, legacy, the stubborn refusal to be erased. What will you do now? Jonah asked. Keep moving, I suppose. Find another horizon. You could stay. Help us rebuild. Make sure Ward's people don't try anything. Ryder shook his head. This is your home. Your fight now. You don't need me anymore. Didn't need you before either, but we're glad you were here. So am I. He rode away as the sun was setting, Harrow's Crossing growing smaller behind him until it disappeared over the ridge. The valley was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing. The families would rebuild. The crops would grow again. Life would continue. And somewhere ahead, another town waited. Another fight. Another choice between walking away and standing ground. Ryder didn't know which he'd choose next time, but for now, for this place, he'd chosen right. That was enough. It had to be. 3 months later, Ryder returned to Harrow's Crossing on a morning when autumn was just beginning to edge into the valley, turning the cottonwoods gold and putting a sharpness in the air that spoke of coming winter. He hadn't planned to come back, had told himself the job was finished and there were other places that needed what he could offer. But something kept pulling him this direction. Unfinished business, maybe. Or just the need to see how the story ended. The town looked different in ways both obvious and subtle. The burned-out boarding house had been demolished, the lot cleared and replanted with grass that was already starting to take hold. The Ward Cattle Company headquarters stood empty, its windows dark, a for sale sign weathered by sun and rain. The bank had new management, and the sheriff's office had a temporary marshal sent by the territorial government until proper elections could be held. But the biggest changes were in the people. They walked differently now, heads up, shoulders back, making eye contact instead of avoiding it. The weight of fear had lifted enough that ordinary life could resume, and with it came something that looked almost like hope. Ryder tied Comet outside the county clerk's office and went inside. Lena was at her desk, surrounded by the same stacks of paperwork, but looking considerably less exhausted than the last time he'd seen her. She glanced up and her face broke into a surprised smile. "Mr. Callow, I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I, but I was in the area." "The area is 3 territories wide. You came back on purpose." "Maybe I wanted to see how the rebuilding was going. Or maybe you needed to see that it actually worked, that what you did mattered." She stood, gesturing to the files around her. "Well, you're in luck. I can give you the full accounting. 23 families have had their properties restored or received compensation settlements. The bank's under new management and federal oversight. Ward's shell companies have been dissolved and their assets liquidated to pay restitution. Turner's in prison awaiting trial. Kincaid took a plea deal and is serving 5 years. And Calvin Ward himself, still fighting the charges? With every lawyer he can afford, which is fewer than it used to be. His assets were frozen pending the criminal investigation, and what wasn't seized outright has been tied up in civil suits from the families. He's going to spend years in court, and even if he beats the criminal charges, he's financially ruined." Lena's expression carried a satisfaction that was almost fierce. Everything he built is gone. The land, the money, the power, all of it, just gone. Ryder absorbed that, feeling the same grim satisfaction. It wasn't perfect justice. Ward was still breathing free air, still had access to lawyers and appeals, but his ability to hurt people had been broken. That counted for something. "What about Drake?" Lena's expression softened. "Nobody's seen him. The federal investigators wanted to talk to him, but by the time they started looking, he disappeared completely. Some people think he went to Mexico. Others think maybe he just found some quiet place to live out whatever life he's got left." She paused. "You think he's all right?" "I think he's carrying more weight than most people could stand, whether that breaks him or not." Ryder shrugged. "That's up to him. He helped you. Gave you the information you needed to bring Ward down. That should count for something. It does. But it doesn't erase what he did before. He'll have to live with both those things, the man he was and the man he chose to become. That's not easy. No, Lena agreed quietly. It's not. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who'd fought the same fight from different angles and come out the other side changed in ways neither could fully articulate. The families want to thank you, Lena said finally. There's going to be a gathering tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just people sharing food and celebrating the fact that they're still here, still standing. You should come. I'm not much for crowds. Come anyway. These people need to see that standing up to power actually works sometimes. They need to know that fighting back isn't always suicide. Her voice carried an edge of something urgent. And maybe you need to see it too. See the faces of people whose lives you changed. Remind yourself why you did it. Ryder wanted to argue, but she was right. He'd walked away from so many places without ever seeing what came after, without knowing if his actions had mattered or if the next powerful man just filled the vacuum. This time he could know. This time he could see the work of rebuilding with his own eyes. Where and when? The Mercer farm, 6 o'clock. And Mr. Callow? Lena's smile turned warmer. Thank you for coming back, even if it's just to check on us. He left feeling lighter than he had in months, the kind of lightness that came from closure rather than escape. The street was busier now than it had been during Ward's reign. People actually using the town, shopping and talking and conducting the mundane business of ordinary life. A few of them recognized him, nodding or raising hands in greeting. One older woman actually stopped him. You're the one who got Ward, aren't you? I helped. You did more than help. You gave us our town back. Her eyes were bright with emotion. My son, he lost his farm 2 years ago. Couldn't prove the foreclosure was wrong, couldn't fight Ward's lawyers. He took his family and left, went all the way to California. But now he's got a chance to come back, to reclaim what was stolen. That's because of you. Ryder didn't know what to say to that. He'd never been good with gratitude, never felt comfortable being called a hero. Heroes were people who didn't question what they were doing, who believed absolutely in their own righteousness. He'd questioned every step, doubted every decision, and still carried the weight of wondering if he'd done enough. I'm glad he's got that chance, Ryder said finally. We all are. You come to the gathering tomorrow. Let us thank you proper. She walked away before he could decline again, leaving him standing on the street feeling exposed and uncomfortable and strangely pleased all at once. He spent the rest of the day riding through the valley, seeing what had changed and what remained. Some fields were already being worked, farmers preparing for winter wheat and spring planting. Others still showed the scars of what had happened, burned patches, abandoned equipment, fences that needed repair. The recovery was real but incomplete, the kind of slow healing that took years rather than months. At the Morrison property, he found Alice working in what had been a vegetable garden, turning soil with a determination that spoke of refusing to be broken. Her husband James was visible in the distance, repairing fence posts with the careful movements of a man rebuilding more than just property. Alice saw Ryder and straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. Mr. Callow, I heard you were back. Just passing through. That's what you said last time, and look what happened. She gestured at the farm around them. We got our land back. Not all of it. Some of the equipment was sold off before the investigation, and we lost a full year of income. But we've got the property, we've got the house. We can rebuild. How's your husband? Alice glanced toward James, something complicated crossing her face. Better. He stopped drinking. Says he needs to be present for the work of putting things right. It's been hard, the guilt of what he let himself become, the shame of giving up. But he's trying. That's more than I thought I'd see. And you? Tired, angry, still at what was taken from us. But also, she paused, searching for words. Also aware of how close we came to losing everything permanently. If you hadn't pushed, if you hadn't forced the truth into the open, we'd be living in that hotel room for the rest of our lives, watching James drink himself to death while I worked myself into the ground. This way we've got a chance. It's not much, but it's something. Ryder nodded, understanding the nuance of that gratitude. Not clean or simple, but real and earned through survival. You still have those receipts I borrowed? Right here. She pulled a small wooden box from her apron pocket.
kept them close. They're evidence now, part of the federal case. But they also remind me that I wasn't crazy, that we didn't fail. The system was rigged, and we still had the courage to document the truth. That matters. It does. Will you come tomorrow to the gathering? Thinking about it. You should. These people, we need to see that standing up to injustice doesn't always end in tragedy. We need proof that sometimes the good guys win, even if it costs them. She met his eyes directly. And maybe you need to see it too. That you're not just someone who walks into trouble, you're someone who fixes it. There's a difference. He left the Morrison farm thinking about that distinction. Was there a difference? He'd spent so many years drifting from place to place, getting involved in fights that weren't his, and then moving on before the consequences fully settled. He told himself it was about justice, about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. But maybe it was also about avoiding the responsibility of staying, of seeing the messy aftermath, of being present for the slow work of healing. Coming back to Harrow's Crossing forced him to confront that. These people weren't abstractions or causes. They were individuals trying to rebuild their lives from the wreckage Ward had created, doing it day by day with no guarantee of success. And they were doing it because he'd given them the chance, created the opening that let them fight back. That was both humbling and terrifying. The sun was setting by the time he reached the Mercer farm, painting the valley in shades of orange and gold that looked nothing like fire. Just the natural ending of a day, beautiful in its ordinariness. The burned fields showed new growth, winter wheat coming in green and stubborn, refusing to accept that this ground was ruined beyond use. Harold was on the porch, carving something from a piece of wood with careful, deliberate strokes. He looked up as Ryder approached, setting the carving aside. Wondered if you'd show your face again. Couldn't stay away. No, I don't imagine you could. Harold gestured to the other chair. Sit. Tell me what you've been doing these past months. Ryder sat, accepting the offered whiskey and taking a slow sip. Drifting mostly. Had a job up in Montana, nothing important. Spent some time in Colorado. Ended up back here without quite meaning to. Because you needed to see if it stuck, if what you did actually mattered. Something like that. Harold was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the growing wheat. It's stuck. We're still here, still fighting. Some days it feels impossible. The debt we're carrying, the work that needs doing, the knowledge that one bad harvest could put us right back where we started. But we're here. And that's because you didn't walk away when every sensible voice said you should. I'm not sure sensible was ever my strong suit. No. But courage was. And integrity. And the kind of stubbornness that refuses to accept injustice even when stopping it costs you. Harold turned to look at him directly. You gave us back our future. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't have to. I know. But I want you to understand what it means. My grandson, Jonah, he was turning into someone I didn't recognize. Bitter, angry, helpless. Now he's got purpose. He's been helping coordinate the families, making sure everyone knows their rights, standing up in meetings and refusing to back down. You showed him that fighting back was possible. That changed him. As if summoned by his name, Jonah emerged from the house carrying a bundle of papers. He was still 16 but seemed older now, carrying himself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. When he saw Ryder, his face lit up. You came back! Just checking on things. Good. Because I need your advice. Jonah spread the papers on the porch railing, maps and notes and what looked like legal documents. We're organizing the families into a cooperative, shared equipment, coordinated planting schedules, collective bargaining with buyers. The idea is that together we're stronger than we were individually. Ward was able to pick us off one by one because we were isolated. This way, we protect each other. Ryder examined the plans, impressed by the thoroughness and sophistication of what Jonah had put together. This is good work. It's necessary work. We can't prevent another Ward from showing up and trying the same thing, but we can make it harder. We can build systems that protect us instead of leaving us vulnerable. Jonah's expression was serious, older than his years. You taught me that. That fighting back isn't just about opposing what's wrong, it's about building what's right. Creating structures that serve people instead of exploit them. You learned that yourself. I just gave you the opportunity to see it. Maybe. But the opportunity mattered. They talked for another hour, Jonah outlining his plans while Harold interjected with practical concerns, and Ryder offered thoughts based on what he'd seen in other places. It was the kind of conversation that felt productive rather than performative. Three people actually trying to solve problems rather than just talk about them. When the sun had fully set and the stars were beginning to emerge, Jonah gathered his papers and headed back inside, leaving Ryder and Harold alone on the porch. "He's going to do great things," Harold said quietly. "Bigger than this valley. Bigger than stopping one corrupt man. He's got the fire in him now. The belief that change is possible if you're willing to work for it. And you?"
Me. I'm old. I'll work this land until I can't anymore, and then I'll hand it to him knowing it's in good hands. That's enough for me.
"That's more than most people get."
Yeah, it is. Harold refilled their glasses.
"What about you? What's next?"
Ryder considered the question. "Don't know. Keep moving, I suppose. There are other towns, other fights. Or you could stay. Help us build this cooperative. Make sure it actually works. You've got skills, experience. We could use someone like you."
"I'm not a farmer."
"No, but you're someone who understands how power works, how to fight corruption, how to stand up when it costs you. That's valuable. Maybe more valuable than knowing how to plant wheat." Ryder felt the pull of that offer, the temptation of putting down roots and being part of something lasting. But he also knew himself well enough to recognize that staying meant confronting all the reasons he'd spent his life moving, the fear of attachment, the weight of responsibility, the terror of failing people who'd come to depend on him. "I'll think about it," he said finally, which they both knew meant no. Harold nodded, unsurprised. "Well, the offer stands. And tomorrow, you come to the gathering. Let these people thank you. You might not need it, but they do." The next evening, Ryder rode to the Mercer farm to find it transformed. Lanterns hung from fence posts and tree branches casting warm light across the yard. Tables had been set up and were laden with food, bread and roasted meat and vegetables and pies, a communal feast assembled from what people could spare. Families were scattered across the property, talking and eating and laughing with the kind of ease that came from shared survival. Ryder dismounted, suddenly feeling out of place. He'd fought for these people but didn't know most of them, didn't share their history or their daily struggles. He was an outsider who'd temporarily intersected with their lives, and now that the crisis had passed, he wasn't sure what role he was supposed to play. But then people started noticing him. Conversations paused, heads turned, and instead of the awkward silence he'd feared, there was a wave of acknowledgement, nods and raised glasses and quiet words of thanks that rippled through the gathering. Alice Morrison approached with her husband, both of them looking more settled than when Ryder had seen them last. "Mr. Callow, you came." Seemed like the right thing to do. It was. She gestured around at the gathering. "Look at this. 3 months ago, most of these families were scattered, broken, convinced they'd never see their homes again. Now they're here, together, rebuilding. That's because of what you did. It's because of what you all did. I just created the opening." "You did more than that," James Morrison said, his voice rough but clear. "You showed us that fighting back was possible, that we didn't have to just accept what powerful men decided was right. You gave us our dignity back." Other families approached, each with their own story of what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. The Pritchards, who'd moved back from 2 territories away when they heard their land could be restored. The Kellermans, who were suing Ward for lost income and emotional damages. The Yates family, who'd returned after 3 months in hiding, determined not to let fear win. Each story was different, but the thread connecting them was the same. They'd been beaten down and had found the strength to stand back up. Ryder had given them the tools, but they'd done the actual work of rebuilding. As the evening wore on, Harold called for attention, standing on the porch with a glass raised. "I want to say something. We're all here tonight because we survived, because we fought back when it seemed impossible, because we refused to accept that powerful men could just take what they wanted without consequences. Some of that fight was in us already, the stubbornness of people who build their lives from dirt and hard work, but some of it came from outside, from a stranger who had no reason to help us but did anyway." He looked directly at Ryder. Mr. Callow could have ridden through and kept going. He could have decided our problems weren't his business. Instead, he stayed. He fought. He risked his life to get the evidence that brought Ward down.
and he did it without asking for anything in return. That's the kind of person we need more of in this world. People who stand up not because they have to, but because they can. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ryder felt uncomfortable with the attention, but also strangely moved by it. These people weren't just thanking him. They were acknowledging that individual action mattered, that one person choosing to stand against injustice could change the trajectory of an entire community. "I'm not a hero," Ryder said when Harold gestured for him to speak. "I'm just someone who got tired of walking away. Tired of seeing powerful people destroy lives and nobody stopping them." "What happened here?" "It wasn't about me. It was about all of you refusing to stay silent, refusing to accept that this was just how things were. I gave you the evidence, but you're the ones who had the courage to use it. You're the ones who testified, who stood up in court, who kept pushing even when Ward's lawyers tried to bury you in paperwork. You saved yourselves. I just helped." "That help mattered," Lena called from the crowd. "Don't diminish it." "I'm not. I'm just saying." Ryder paused, trying to find words for something he'd been thinking about for months. "I've been in a lot of towns, seen a lot of injustice, and the thing I've learned is that corruption thrives on silence, on people looking away because getting involved costs too much. But it only takes one person refusing to look away to break that silence. One person saying, 'No, this isn't right. I'm going to do something about it.' Once that happens, other people find their courage. The silence breaks, and suddenly, change becomes possible." He looked around at the gathered families, at the faces lit by lantern light, at the evidence of a community putting itself back together. You all had that courage. You just needed someone to give you permission to use it. Next time, and there will be a next time, somewhere, because this pattern never ends, you won't need permission. You'll know that fighting back is possible, that standing up to power works, and you'll do it yourselves, and you'll win, and you'll teach others to do the same. That's how change actually happens. Not through heroes, but through ordinary people choosing to be brave. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Then Harold raised his glass. "To bravery, and to the man who showed us it was possible." "To Ryder Callow!" the crowd echoed, glasses raised, voices carrying across the valley. Ryder drank, feeling the weight of their gratitude and recognition settle into something he could carry. Not pride exactly, but satisfaction. The knowledge that he'd done something meaningful, something that would outlast his presence here. The party continued late into the night, people sharing food and stories and plans for the future. Ryder found himself in conversation after conversation, answering questions about his life and his travels, offering advice on everything from legal strategy to how to spot corruption before it took root. At some point, Jonah found him, pulling him aside with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "When this all started, when we were losing the farm, I wanted revenge. I wanted Ward to suffer the way we'd suffered. I wanted violence and punishment and pain." Jonah's voice was steady, but carried the weight of confession. "But you showed me something different. You showed me that justice doesn't have to be about revenge. It can be about restoration, about making things right instead of just making people hurt. That changed how I see the world." "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing," Ryder agreed. "Revenge is about your pain. Justice is about preventing future pain. Sometimes they overlap, but the motivation matters." "I understand that now. And I wanted you to know, whatever I do with my life, however I use what I've learned, I'm going to remember that distinction. I'm going to fight for justice, not revenge." "Good, because the world needs people who understand that difference." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the gathering, until Jonah was called away to help with something. Ryder remained, observing the community that had been shattered and was slowly knitting itself back together through shared effort and mutual support. When he finally left around midnight, riding back toward town under a sky brilliant with stars, he felt different, lighter, like he'd finally closed a loop that had been open in his entire adult life. The question of whether individual action mattered, whether one person could actually make a difference against systems designed to crush resistance. The answer was yes, but not alone, not through heroism or violence or dramatic gestures, through creating openings for others, through refusing to accept injustice, through standing up when it cost something and trusting that others would find their courage too. That was the lesson Harrow's Crossing had taught him. Not that he was special or essential, but that choosing to act was itself powerful. that refusing to be silent broke something fundamental in the machinery of corruption, that ordinary people, given the chance and the tools, would fight for themselves and each other with a ferocity that no amount of money or power could overcome. The next morning, Ryder packed his things and prepared to leave. He'd stayed longer than intended, seen more than he'd expected, and came away with something he hadn't known he needed: proof that the pattern could be broken, that systems of oppression weren't inevitable, that people could reclaim power that had been taken from them. He was checking Comet's saddle when Lena found him at the livery stable. Leaving without saying goodbye? Was going to stop by the office. No, you weren't. You were going to ride out quiet and avoid the awkward farewell. She crossed her arms. So I'm making it awkward now. You're welcome. Despite himself, Ryder smiled. Thank you for that. Someone has to keep you honest. Lena's expression softened. Will you come back? I don't know. Maybe. That's not a real answer. It's the only one I have. I'm not good at staying in one place. Never have been. Because staying means commitment, means being present for the hard parts, not just the dramatic confrontations. Lena stepped closer. But you should know, you're always welcome here. This community owes you more than we can ever repay. If you need a place, if you need people who understand what it costs to stand up to injustice, you have that here. Ryder felt something tight in his chest, the kind of emotion he usually avoided because it made leaving harder. I'll remember that. Good. She held out a hand. Travel safe, Mr. Callow. And thank you for everything. He shook her hand, then mounted Comet and rode out of Harrow's Crossing as morning sun painted the valley in gold. He looked back once, seeing the town small and vulnerable but also vital, alive, continuing. The valley would recover. Not perfectly. Some scars would remain. Some families would never fully heal. Some trust would take generations to rebuild. But the pattern of corruption had been broken. Ward's empire was rubble. The families had their land and their dignity and their future. That was enough. It had to be. Ryder rode north, following roads he'd traveled before, heading toward horizons he hadn't seen yet. Somewhere ahead was another town, another fight, another choice between walking away and standing ground. He didn't know which he'd choose, didn't know if the lessons of Harrow's Crossing had changed him fundamentally or just temporarily. But he knew one thing with certainty: the pattern never ended. Wherever greed met silence, wherever power crushed the powerless, wherever systems were built to exploit rather than serve, fire followed. Injustice was constant, inevitable, part of human nature's darker machinery. But so was resistance. So were people like Harold and Jonah and Lena and Alice who refused to accept that might made right. People who documented injustice even when nobody listened, who kept fighting even when it seemed hopeless, who built communities based on mutual support rather than exploitation. And so were people like Mason Drake, who'd been broken and rebuilt as weapons but could still choose at the end to betray the system that created them, who could still find redemption, even if it cost them everything. Those people existed everywhere. They just needed permission to act, needed proof that resistance was possible, needed one person to refuse to look away so they could find their own courage. Ryder could be that person, not because he was special, but because he was willing to stand up when it cost him, willing to fight when it was easier to walk away, willing to believe that individual action mattered even when all evidence suggested otherwise. That was the real lesson of Harrow's Crossing. Not that one hero could save everyone, but that one person choosing to act could create ripples that became waves, could break silence that enabled injustice, could give others permission to fight back. The valley disappeared behind him as Comet crested a ridge, but Ryder carried it with him, carried the faces of people who'd found their courage, the knowledge that fighting back had worked, the proof that corruption wasn't invincible. He carried those things toward whatever came next, toward the next town and the next fight, and the next choice between silence and resistance. And when that moment came, when he smelled smoke on the wind and saw injustice burning someone's life to ash, he knew what he'd do. He'd ride down anyway. Because that's what you did when you couldn't walk away anymore, when you'd seen too much and carried too much and understood too clearly that your choice mattered. You rode toward the fire, and you fought. And sometimes if you were lucky and brave and stubborn enough, you won. The end.